Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the harem king of all worlds and got married to Rias, Erza, Esdeath, and Yoruichi. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The World Breaker. The air in Konoha tasted of peace. It was a flavor Naruto had spent his entire life fighting for, and now, in the quiet years that followed the war, it had finally settled over the village like a warm blanket. He stood atop the fourth Hokage's stone head, the wind whipping his cloak around him, a familiar and comforting weight. Below, the village thrived. The sounds of merchants haggling, children laughing in the academy yard, and the distant clang of steel from a training ground, it was a symphony of normalcy he had spilled blood to protect. He closed his eyes, letting the sun warm his face. A simple pleasure that felt more profound than any victory. Kurama was a quiet, grumbling presence within him, a partner now, not a prisoner. The sage's power rested easy in his soul. For the first time in his life, everything was right. That was when the world broke. It didn't begin with a sound or a tremor, but with a wrongness in the light. The afternoon sun, a moment ago a brilliant gold, seemed to thin, turning a sickly, jaundiced yellow. A high-pitched hum, like a million cicadas screaming at once, began to vibrate not in his ears, but directly in his skull. Naruto's eyes snapped open. This wasn't a genjutsu. His senses, honed by sage mode, were screaming that this was real. The very air began to shimmer, distorting like a heat haze on a blistering summer day. The edges of the Hokage monument blurred, the village below seeming to ripple as if it were a reflection in disturbed water. "What the hell?" he muttered, dropping into a low crouch. Kurama stirred within him, a surge of alarm and confusion. "Kit, this isn't ninjutsu. It's something else. Something tearing." The tearing became literal, with a sound like a universe of glass shattering, a fissure of pure, colorless energy split the sky above Konoha. It wasn't a crack in the clouds, it was a crack in existence itself. A horrific, irresistible pressure, like the bottom of the deepest ocean, slammed down on him. It wasn't chakra, it was a physical law being rewritten, and he was caught in the syntax error. His feet slid on the stone as the gravitational pull reversed, yanking him upward toward the screaming void. He slammed his chakra-infused hands onto the monument, stone cracking under the strain as he tried to anchor himself. But it was like trying to hold onto a pebble in an avalanche. The village, his home, stretched and warped below him, the faces of his friends flashing through his mind: Sakura, Kakashi, Hinata. He felt a primal shout tear from his throat, a name, a denial. But the sound was swallowed by the vortex. His grip failed, and the world he knew dissolved into a smear of agonizing light. The landing was a brutal, bone-jarring impact that knocked the wind from his lungs. He hit something solid that felt like jagged obsidian, skidding several meters before rolling to a stop. His senses reeled. The air was thin and smelled of ozone and damp, ancient stone. He pushed himself onto his hands and knees, his head pounding. The symphony of Konoha was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. He was no longer in the land of fire. He wasn't anywhere he recognized. He was on a floating island of black rock, one of 1,000 such islands that drifted lazily in a sky the color of a bruised twilight. Above him, a colossal vortex of sickly purple and orange light churned slowly. The source of the only illumination. Strange, impossible structures dotted the other islands. Some had crystalline towers that pulsed with soft light, others held twisted, organic-looking spires. And a few were clearly ruins from cultures he couldn't begin to comprehend. Below him was a sheer drop into a sea of roiling, silver mist. "Okay. Not in Kansas anymore," he breathed, forcing himself to his feet. A quick self-assessment. No broken bones, chakra network was a mess but intact. He flared his senses, trying to get a feel for this place. The natural energy was chaotic, almost schizophrenic, flowing in unpredictable currents that made entering sage mode a treacherous proposition. But beneath that chaos, he felt it. A cold spot, a void, an area of absolute nothingness that was actively hungry. His head snapped to the right. Standing at the far edge of the rocky island was a figure. It was humanoid, tall and gaunt, wrapped in what looked like decaying gray bandages. It had no discernible features. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, blank expanse where a face should be. But the wrongness emanated from it. As it took a step, the black rock beneath its foot turned a dull, lifeless gray, crumbling silently into dust. The very concept of color and life seemed to recede from its presence. This was the source of the cold. The Herald. Naruto didn't waste a second on questions. That thing was an enemy. He slapped his hands together, and in a puff of smoke, a dozen shadow clones fanned out, kunai in hand, circling the entity. 4 charged in from different directions. The creature didn't react, didn't even seem to notice them. But as they entered a 10-meter radius around it, their movements became sluggish. The vibrant orange of their jumpsuits faded to a muted gray. Their battle cries died in their throats, the sound simply ceasing to exist. Before their kunai could land, the clones disintegrated, not with the usual puff of smoke, but by crumbling into silent, gray ash. Naruto's eyes widened. It drained them, not just their chakra, but their very existence. He formed a Rasengan in his palm, the spiraling blue chakra a stark contrast to the encroaching emptiness. He had to get in close and end this fast. He blurred forward, using the body flicker technique to appear directly behind the Herald. He thrust the Rasengan forward, aiming for the center of its back. The moment he entered its aura, he felt it. A profound lethargy washed over him, his muscles feeling like lead. The vibrant, rotating chakra in his hand sputtered, the sphere shrinking. Its powerful hum fading into a weak buzz. It was like trying to light a match in a vacuum. The Herald turned its blank face toward him, a gesture that was somehow more terrifying than any monstrous roar. He felt a psychic chill, a whisper in the back of his mind that wasn't a word but a concept: silence. He was in trouble, real trouble. The thing's aura was an absolute defense against ninjutsu. Just as he was about to be overwhelmed, a streak of golden light slammed into the ground between them. The impact was a thunderclap that shattered the unnatural silence, kicking up a shower of obsidian shards. Standing in the crater, wreathed in an aura of crackling purple and gold electricity, was a woman. She had dark skin, cat-like golden eyes that radiated sharp intelligence, and short, spiky purple hair. She wore a simple black garment that did little to conceal the lean, powerful muscles of a warrior born. She didn't look at Naruto. Her gaze was fixed on the Herald, a smirk playing on her lips. "Well, now, you're an ugly one, aren't you? Draining the life out of everything. That's no fun at all." Without another word, she vanished. Not like his body flicker, but an instantaneous, absolute disappearance. She reappeared behind the Herald, her back arched, her entire body engulfed in the swirling, high-density energy. Shunko, her fist, crackling with the raw power of Kido and Hakuda, slammed into the Herald. There was no finesse, just overwhelming force. The impact sent a shockwave across the island, and for the first time, the Herald was thrown back, its gray form tumbling through the air. The woman didn't let up. She was a blur of motion, a golden comet ricocheting off the air itself, each strike a sonic boom that tore into the Herald's form. Her energy was a direct counter to its draining aura. She was a roaring sun fighting back the encroaching night. Naruto took the opening, leaping back and trying to gather natural energy. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. But he managed to draw in just enough to activate Sage Mode, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. He could see it now. The Herald wasn't a living thing. It was a hole in the world, the woman was stuffing it full of so much energy it was starting to fray at the seams. Their impromptu teamwork, however, attracted the wrong kind of attention. A wave of chilling cold, so intense it frosted the very air, swept across the island. Naruto and the purple-haired woman both broke off their attacks, leaping away as massive, razor-sharp pillars of ice erupted from the ground where they had stood. Standing on a newly formed glacier that now dominated one side of the island was another woman. She was tall and beautiful, with long blue hair and eyes that held the cold, detached cruelty of a winter storm. She wore a white military uniform that accentuated her regal and commanding presence. A predatory smile graced her lips as she looked not at the Herald, but at Naruto and the woman beside him. "Magnificent," she said, her voice like the crack of ice. "Such power, such spirit, you will be worthy opponents." This was Esdeath. And her interest wasn't in the monster, it was in the thrill of the hunt. Without warning, she pointed a finger. A volley of ice daggers, each the size of a spear, shot toward them. The purple-haired woman clicked her tongue in annoyance. Another one. Don't you people have anything better to do? She grabbed Naruto's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Come on, pretty boy. Try to keep up. She dragged him into a high-speed dash, weaving through the deadly ice barrage. Name's Yoruichi. By the way, she said conversationally, as if they weren't in the middle of a three-way death match. Naruto. He yelled back, forming a Rasenshuriken in his hand. He hurled it not at Esdeath, but at the herald, which was starting to recover. The shuriken shrieked through the air, but Esdeath simply waved her hand. A thick wall of ice, impossibly dense, rose to intercept it. The explosion was deafening, blasting a blizzard of ice shards across the battlefield. Esdeath laughed, a sound of pure, exhilarating joy. Wonderful, show me more. She stomped her foot, and the entire island began to freeze over. Naruto created a wave of shadow clones to charge her, a diversion while he and Yoruichi dealt with the primary threat. Yoruichi was a whirlwind of focused violence, her Shunko attacks battering the herald relentlessly. But Esdeath was a force of nature. Her ice constructs were not just simple attacks, they were intricate, deadly weapons. She created a small army of ice soldiers that clashed with Naruto's clones, turning the battlefield into a chaotic melee of orange and blue. The sheer concentration of power being thrown around was a beacon in this strange, unstable dimension. And it did not go unnoticed. A circle of crimson light, intricate and complex like a magical diagram, appeared in the sky. From its center, a pillar of red and black energy descended. And a group of figures materialized. Leading them was a young woman with stunning crimson hair that flowed down to her waist and kind blue-green eyes that currently held a look of serious appraisal. Her power was immense, a tangible aura of destruction that radiated from her in waves. This was Rias, and behind her stood her peerage, ready for battle. Simultaneously, the pace beside them shimmered and tore open. A woman in magnificent silver armor with angelic wings stepped through the rift. She had scarlet hair tied in a practical ponytail and a gaze filled with an iron resolve that could cut steel. In her hands were two gleaming swords, and dozens more materialized in the air behind her, all pointing outward. Erza Scarlet had arrived. The five of them, Naruto, Yoruichi, Esdeath, Rias, and Erza, formed a chaotic, unintentional circle. The battle paused for a tense, heartbeat-long standoff. Each one was a powerhouse from their own world, an apex predator sudden Why finding themselves in a cage with four others? Esdeath's smile widened. Rias's expression was one of cool calculation. Erza's was wary and ready. Yoruichi looked entertained by the whole mess. And Naruto, standing in the center of it all, felt a headache coming on. Their silent confrontation was shattered by a pressure that dwarfed everything that had come before. The first herald, battered and torn by Yoruichi's assault, suddenly disintegrated into gray dust. But its destruction was a signal. The churning vortex in the sky pulsed violently, and a larger fissure opened. From it descended a second herald, this one twice the size. Its form more defined, its aura of silence and decay so potent that the very island they stood on began to crumble at the edges. The light from the vortex dimmed, the air grew frigid, and all ambient sound vanished completely. There was only the oppressive, crushing silence of the void. The standoff was over. Instinct took over. Every warrior on the island, regardless of their origin or allegiance, turned to face the new, common threat. A silent, unspoken agreement passed between them. They could try to kill each other later. First, they had to survive. There were no commands given. No strategies discussed. Their synergy was born of pure combat instinct. Requip. Heaven's Wheel. Erza commanded, and 100 swords swirled around her, launching a blinding barrage that served as cover. Rias's hands glowed with crimson energy. Issei may not be here, but I am still the Grimoire heir, she declared, unleashing a massive sphere of the power of Destruct. Cheon that blasted a chunk out of the herald's torso. Esdeath, seeing a truly powerful foe, grinned with feral delight. She slammed her hands onto the ground. Weiss Schnabel. An avalanche of ice spikes erupted, piercing the herald from below, attempting to pin it in place. Yoruichi, a golden blur, zipped across the battlefield, her lightning-fast strikes creating openings, diverting the creature's attention. Naruto, she called out. It can't handle concentrated, pure energy. Hit it with everything you've got. Naruto needed no further encouragement. He created 3 clones. 2 began gathering natural energy for him, while the third helped him form the biggest Rasenshuriken he could manage. The Sage of 6 Paths power flowed through him, mixing with the natural energy, creating a weapon of terrifying power. The shuriken grew, a miniature sun of shrieking wind and chakra. Everyone, get clear, he roared. Erza's swords formed a protective barrier around the others. Rias added a defensive demonic ward. Esdeath encased them in a dome of ice. With a final surge of power, Naruto hurled the attack. The Sage Art Magnet Release Rasenshuriken soared through the air, pulling in shards of rock and ice, becoming an unstoppable vortex of destruction. It hit the Herald dead center. The expected explosion didn't happen. Instead, the world went white. The attack didn't just detonate, it unmade the Herald, overloading its connection to the void until it imploded, collapsing in on itself in a silent flash of pure, annihilating energy. The resulting shockwave blew the top half of the island clean off. They were left standing on a fractured precipice, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly beginning to fade. The silence that remained was no longer oppressive, but a natural quiet, the aftermath of a great storm. They had won. The tension, however, snapped back into place instantly. They looked at each other, no longer allies of convenience, but 5 strangers of immense power in a place none of them understood. Who struck first? Who could be trusted? It was then that a voice echoed through the nexus, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was ancient, genderless, and resonated with a power that made all 5 of them tense. 5 worlds shall unite in heart and hand to face the silence. The words hung in the air, clear and absolute, sinking into their minds. A king must be chosen. A queen must stand. Naruto looked from the regal demon princess, to the indomitable armored knight, to the cruel ice general, to the goddess of flash. Each one met his gaze, with an intensity that promised either a powerful alliance or a battle that would shake the foundations of this strange new reality. The prophecy was a declaration, but it felt like a challenge. A throne had been offered, and 4 queens were now in play. A new, far more complicated war had just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Table of Queens. The ancient voice faded, leaving a silence more profound than the one the herald had imposed. The 5 of them stood on the jagged remnant of the island, the prophecy hanging between them like an unsheathed blade. It was a declaration that bound them together and simultaneously pitted them against one another. A king must be chosen. 4 of them were women of immense power and pride. One was Naruto. The implication was as clear as it was dangerous. Esdeath's lips curled into a slow, predatory smile. Her icy gaze swept over the others before settling on Naruto. A king, it says. This should prove entertaining. The strongest will rule. It is the only law that matters. Her aura flared, a palpable wave of cold that promised violence. Before the tension could snap, Rias took a single, deliberate step forward. The destructive energy around her subsided, replaced by an air of calm, aristocratic authority. Fighting amongst ourselves now would be foolish. We are in an unknown territory, facing an unknown enemy, and we have just been handed a prophecy that concerns us all. Our first priority must be to secure a defensible position and gather intelligence. Her voice was measured, logical, cutting through the raw aggression. Erza, ever the pragmatist, gave a sharp nod, her swords vanishing in a shower of blue light. She's right. A blind battle is a foolish one. We need to understand where we are and what we're up against. Yoruichi stretched lazily, like a cat after a nap, the immense power of her shunko receding beneath her skin. A base sounds nice. This rock is a real fixer-upper. She shot Naruto a sly wink. Besides, I am curious to see what the rest of you can do when you're not just trying to avoid being erased. All eyes turned to Naruto. He was the variable, the one named by implication. He met Esdeath's challenging stare, acknowledging the promise of a future conflict, but then turned his attention to Rias. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the same kind of strategic foresight Shikamaru had. She was right. Charging in headfirst was his old habit, but he had learned better. He was a cage now, even if he didn't wear the hat. He had to think like one. "All right," he said, his voice firm, grounding the volatile group. "A base it is. Lead the way." His easy agreement, his willingness to cede command to the most logical plan, seemed to surprise them. It was not the act of a man grasping for a crown. Rias gave a small, approving smile and produced a delicate, arcane compass from a pocket of dimensional space. Its needle spun wildly before settling on a single, unwavering direction. "There," she said, "a stable pocket dimension. It should provide us with the shelter we need." With another summoning circle, she and her small contingent of loyal peerage members, who had remained respectfully silent until now, rose into the air. Erza's angelic wings carried her upward. Yoruichi simply flickered into the air, seemingly walking on nothing. Esdeath created a platform of ice, lifting her with cold majesty. Naruto gathered chakra to his feet and leapt, easily keeping pace. They flew in a tense, silent formation through the twilight chaos of the Nexus. It was a graveyard of realities, a cosmic CL, littered with the flotsam and jetsam of 1,000 broken worlds. They passed continents of glass that chimed with a ghostly music, forests of petrified wood where the trees were the size of mountains, and the silent, drifting husks of celestial bodies. It was awe-inspiring and deeply terrifying. Any one of these worlds might have been like his own, teeming with life and dreams, before whatever CE governed this place had torn it asunder. After what felt like an hour, Rias pointed toward a swirling nebula of gold and silver. Through there, they passed through the gaseous veil and emerged into a pocket of serene stability. Before them floated a single, massive island, far larger than the one they'd left. Upon it sat a colossal structure, a white stone observatory with a vast, shattered brass dome. It was clearly ancient, weathered by eons, but it radiated an aura of deep, abiding stillness. It felt safe. They landed in the observatory's main concourse, a vast, circular room whose Ling was a mesmerizing star chart of a forgotten sky. Dust lay thick on everything, but the architecture was magnificent. Rias immediately took charge, her voice ringing with the authority of a born commander. "Akeno, Kaneko, begin setting up defensive wards around the island's perimeter. Kiba, Gasper, scout the immediate area for any native life or threats. We need a full operational picture." Our peerage moved with practiced efficiency, vanishing to their tasks. Rias herself walked to the center of the room, placing her hands on a large, circular dais. Demonic energy flowed from her, and the ancient building seemed to awaken. Faint lines of light traced paths across the floors, and a low hum resonated through the stone. "This place has its own dormant power source. I can reactivate it," she explained to the others. "It will provide us with light, heat, and a foundation for my wards." Erza, seeing a task to be done, began systematically clearing debris from one of the antechambers. Equipped magic allowing her to move massive blocks of fallen stone with ease. It was a practical, straightforward job, and she threw herself into it with a focused intensity. Naruto, wanting to help, created a small army of shadow clones to begin the monumental task of dusting and cleaning the entire observatory. Only 2 of their number remained idle. Yoruichi found a high rafter to perch on, watching the flurry of activity below with an amused glint in her golden eyes. And Esdeath, with a flick of her wrist, conjured a throne of glittering, razor-sharp ice upon the central dais, directly opposite Rias. She sat down, crossed her legs, and simply watched, her presence a silent, chilling challenge to the nascent order being formed. The work continued for hours. A strange sense of domesticity settled over the impossible situation. Naruto's clones, chattering amongst themselves, made short work of the cleaning, their sheer numbers turning an impossible task into a manageable one. Erza single-handedly renovated what would become their barracks and training hall. Rias, with Akeno's help, wove a web of complex demonic wards that made the very air around the island thrum with protective power. Eventually, Naruto found himself on a wide, curved balcony overlooking the majestic, chaotic vista of the Nexus. The sheer scale of it was enough to make anyone feel small. A soft clink of armor announced Erza's arrival. She came to stand beside him, her own gaze lost in the sea of broken worlds. The fierce warrior he had seen on the battlefield was gone, replaced by a woman with a quiet, contemplative weight in her eyes. It's endless, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Naruto agreed. Makes you wonder how many of them were like ours. I was thinking the same thing. She turned to him, her expression serious. The people I fight for, my guild, they are my family. Everything I do is to protect them. To see this, it makes you realize how fragile that is. Naruto understood that sentiment perfectly. He saw the faces of Team 7, of Iruka-sensei, of the entire village. They were the reason he'd clawed his way back from hatred and despair. My home is the same. I wasn't liked growing up. But I had people who believed in me. I made promises to them. To all of them. That I'd create a world where they could be safe and happy. He looked at his hands. Guess the world is a lot bigger than I thought. A promise is a promise, no matter the scale, Erza said. There was no pity in her voice, only a deep, resonant understanding. She saw the truth of him, not the monster he once carried or the hero he had become, but the lonely boy who had sworn an oath. In her, he saw the same thing, a woman who had reforged her own pain into a shield for others. A silent pact of mutual respect formed between them. A bond forged in shared purpose, stronger than any steel. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a blur of motion and a cheerful voice. There you are. All this work is making me antsy. Yoruichi appeared, hanging upside down from the balcony's archway, her golden eyes sparkling with mischief. I was hoping for a little more action. She dropped to the ground, landing silently. You, Blondie, you're fast. But are you fast enough? Naruto grinned, the familiar thrill of a challenge lighting him up. Faster than you can believe. As that's so, she purred. How about a little race? Around the island. Last one back has to clean Esdeath's ice throne. You're on. Before Erza could even protest the sudden shift in mood, they were gone. Naruto, using his body flicker, was a blur of orange. But Yoruichi was something else entirely. She didn't just run, she flowed. Her mastery of shunpo, or flash step, was so absolute that she seemed to be teleporting, vanishing. And reappearing in bursts of speed that left Naruto struggling to keep up. Their race quickly devolved into a high-speed game of tag across the floating island. Naruto used shadow clones as decoys, trying to corner her. But she was impossibly evasive. He sent a Rasengan her way, and she dodged it with a hair's breadth, laughing as the attack carved a trench in the ancient rock. She retaliated with a blast of shunko, forcing him to use a substitution jutsu to escape. It was less a fight and more a dance, a whirlwind of witty taunts, explosive near misses, and the sheer joy of two masters of movement pushing each other to their limits. Naruto hadn't felt this kind of exhilarating, purely joyful competition since his early spars with Kakashi. Yoruichi, for her part, was genuinely impressed. He was raw, but his instincts were impeccable, and the sheer unpredictability of his clones made him a uniquely frustrating opponent. Their chemistry was instant, electric, built on adrenaline and a shared, irrepressible spirit. They arrived back at the balcony at the exact same moment, laughing and breathless, leaving Erza staring after them with a bewildered half-smile. Later, as a semblance of order had been established, Rias found Naruto in the observatory's main library. His clones were meticulously organizing ancient, alien texts onto shelves. Rias dismissed them with a wave of her hand. Leave the rest, she said. We need to talk strategy. She led him to a large table where a magical projection of the Nexus now hovered. My intelligence network, limited as it is here, has confirmed some things. This place, the Nexus, is a crossroads of dimensions. It is inherently unstable. The creatures, the heralds, are drawn to concentrations of power. Our battle was essentially a dinner bell. Naruto nodded, his expression serious. So we lay low, for now. But the prophecy suggests we can't. We are meant to be the answer to this silence. She looked at him, her gaze analytical. In my world, battles are won as much through politics and strategy as they are through force. Tell me, Naruto Uzumaki, what is your grand strategy for uniting a demon king, a fairy queen, a goddess of flash, and a sadist who wants to kill you? It was a test. She wanted to gauge his mind. Naruto wasn't a genius planner, but he understood people. He looked at the map, but his mind was on the individuals. I don't have one, he answered honestly. Rias's eyebrow arched slightly. My strategy is that we're not an army. We're 5 people. Erza fights for her home. Yoruichi fights because she's bored sitting still. Esdeath fights for the sake of fighting. And you, he looked at her. You fight because you see the whole board and know someone has to make the right moves. If we're going to work together, it won't be because one of us is king. It'll be because we trust the person standing next to us. We build that first. The rest comes later. Rias was taken aback. In the underworld, everything was about power, status, and leverage. Naruto's focus on genuine, personal connection was so simple, so naive, that it was utterly brilliant. It was a kind of strength she had never encountered before, not the power to destroy, but the power to build. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a fascination with this powerful, empathetic, unpredictable man. Her analysis was interrupted when the observatory's main doors slammed open. Akeno, her most trusted subordinate, rushed in, her usual playful demeanor gone, replaced by a look of stark terror. Rias-sama, I've decrypted the data from the central astrolabe. About the silent god. Rias's face hardened. Report. It doesn't just destroy worlds, Akeno stammered, her voice trembling. The worlds it consumes, they don't just die. They are erased, retroactively. They are removed from time, from history, from all memory. It's as if they never existed at all. A chilling silence fell over the library. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a fight for survival. It was a fight for existence itself. If they failed, no one would mourn their worlds, because their worlds would never have been. Konoha, fairy tale, the soul society, the underworld, all would be reduced to a blank page in a book that was never written. Rias immediately called everyone to the main concourse. She relayed the information, her voice grim and steady. The news landed like a physical blow. Erza's hands clenched into fists, her face paling at the thought of Simon, of Grandpa Rob, of all her friends being not just killed, but unmade. Yoruichi's playful smirk vanished completely, replaced by a cold, hard fury. Even Naruto felt a deep, primal fear. The thought of his parents' sacrifice, of Jiraiya's legacy, of every bond he had ever forged being rendered meaningless was more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced. It was into this horrified silence that Esdeath's slow, deliberate applause echoed. She rose from her ice throne, her expression one of utter, ecstatic delight. Wonderful, she declared, her voice ringing with manic glee. An enemy that can truly erase everything. This is the ultimate battle. The ultimate prey. The weak will be purged. And only the strong will have the right to exist. This is the world I have always dreamed of. She turned her piercing gaze on Naruto, who was still reeling from the revelation. She saw his fear, his horror, and mistook it for weakness. Now was the moment. This group is wallowing in sentiment and fear, she announced, the temperature in the room dropping 20 degrees. The moisture in the air began to crystallize into glittering frost. It needs a leader who embraces the struggle, who lives for the culling of the weak. It needs a true predator on the throne. She pointed a single, elegant finger at Naruto. A shard of pure ice forming at its tip. Your strength is the only language I care to understand. Prove to me you are worthy of leading this fight, or I will break you and take your place. The challenge had been issued. The fragile alliance, not even a day old, was about to shatter. Naruto stood before the Ice General, the fate of 5 worlds resting not on a grand battle against a cosmic god, but on the outcome of a duel he could not afford to win, and could not afford to lose. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Ice and Sun. The air in the concourse crackled, growing heavy and cold. Frost spider webbed across the floor from Esdeath's boots, a visible extension of her chilling intent. Her challenge was not mere posturing, it was a fundamental law of her being, and it had been issued before the others. A public declaration that demanded a response. This is absurd, Rias stated, stepping forward, her crimson aura flaring in a protective, warning pulse. Our enemy is a universe-devouring entity. And you propose we weaken ourselves with infighting. The timing could not be worse. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, Esdeath countered, her eyes never leaving Naruto. I intend to discover if our so-called king is that link. Fear in the face of annihilation is a weakness. We must be led by one who revels in such a glorious struggle. Erza summoned a single sword into her hand, its blade a sliver of defiant light in the growing gloom. Strength isn't demonstrated through pointless duels. It is proven when you stand to protect others. This fight serves nothing. Naruto held up a hand, silencing his would-be defenders. He met Esdeath's gaze, and in her eyes, he saw a language he understood perfectly. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of Gaara, of Nagato, of Sasuke. It was the look of someone whose pain had hardened into a philosophy, a shield against the world. He couldn't talk her out of this. Words would be meaningless. He had to answer her in the only language she currently respected. I accept, he said, his voice calm and clear. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. He turned to Rias and Erza. She's not wrong. You need to know if you can count on me. And she needs to know she can count on me, too. This isn't a fight to the death. It's a very aggressive job interview. He gave them a strained but confident grin. Esdeath let out a short, sharp laugh of genuine appreciation. Well said. At least you are not a coward. They chose a nearby island for their arena, a desolate plate of black, volcanic rock that was utterly barren. It was a fitting stage for a battle of elemental fury. Rias, with Akino's help, created a powerful observation ward, allowing the others to watch the duel from the safety of the observatory's balcony without being caught in the crossfire. Naruto and Esdeath faced each other across the barren expanse. The chaotic, bruised sky of the Nexus was their only witness. There was no referee, no rules beyond the unspoken agreement that this would end when one of them could no longer fight. Esdeath didn't wait for a signal. With a graceful, almost dismissive wave of her hand, the battle began. A dozen massive pillars of ice, each honed to a razor's point, erupted from the ground beneath Naruto's feet. He didn't even seem to move, simply blurring out of the way with a flicker of speed. The ice lances shattering against the empty space where he had been a nanosecond before. He landed 100 meters away, dropping into a familiar fighting stance. Esdeath smiled. Good reflexes. But you can't dodge forever. She raised her arms, and the very sky seemed to obey her. A storm of ice javelins, thousands of them, materialized above, blotting out the swirling vortex of light. With a sharp downward thrust of her hands, the volley descended, a blizzard of targeted, lethal projectiles that shrieked through the thin air. Naruto slapped his hands together. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a series of smoke-filled pops, 200 Narutos flooded the battlefield. They scattered, a chaotic sea of orange, each one a target, drawing the fire of the ice storm. The clones were impaled, shattered, and blasted apart. But they served their purpose. They bought the original time. While his clones caused chaos, Naruto gathered natural energy. The chaotic energy of the Nexus was still difficult to handle. But his brief time here had allowed him to acclimate. The orange pigmentation of Sage Mode flared around his eyes, and his senses exploded outward. He could feel the cold, sharp intent behind every shard of ice. Could sense the flow of power from Esdeath herself. Impressive numbers, Esdeath called out, her voice laced with condescending amusement as she effortlessly froze and shattered a dozen clones that tried to charge her. But quantity is no substitute for quality. The weak, no matter how numerous, are still weak. They're not supposed to beat you. Naruto yelled back, appearing suddenly from behind a rock formation. He had a Rasengan swirling in each hand. They're just here to distract you. He thrust forward, a two-pronged attack. Esdeath didn't move. Instead, a wall of ice, thick and impossibly dense, rose from the ground to intercept him. His Rasengan struck the wall, exploding with concussive force, blasting a crater in the icy defense but failing to break through. Before the dust of the impact could even settle, a blade of pure ice extended from the wall, aimed directly at his heart. He twisted away, the blade slicing through his jacket, leaving a freezing cut along his ribs. He leapt back, putting distance between them. This woman was a monster. Her defense was as formidable as her offense, and she transitioned between them instantly. Is that all? She taunted. The power of a king should be absolute. I'm just getting warmed up. This time, he changed tactics. A group of clones charged her head-on, while the real Naruto, cloaked by their distraction, circled around her flank. He was building a much larger attack, pouring Sage Chakra into it. Sage Art. Massive Rasengan. The sphere of chakra in his hand grew to the size of a boulder. He burst from the cover of his clones and slammed it into Esdeath's side. This time, there was no ice wall. The attack connected. The impact was immense, a shockwave that cracked the very island beneath them. But as the smoke cleared, Naruto's eyes widened in disbelief. Esdeath stood there, a thin sheen of ice armor covering her body, cracked and fractured but holding. She had taken the full force of the blow. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of her mouth, which was stretched into a wide, ecstatic grin. Yes, she breathed, her eyes glowing with ferocious joy. That's it. That is the feeling. The thrill of facing a worthy opponent. Now, let me show you my gratitude. She stomped her foot, and the temperature of the entire island plummeted. A flash freeze swept outwards from her, encasing dozens of Naruto's clones in solid ice. She was no longer just throwing ice, she was commanding the very concept of cold. You believe your bonds make you strong, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register as she began to walk toward him, the ground freezing solid with her every step. A foolish sentiment. Attachments are weights. They breed fear. Fear of loss. The truly strong stand alone, dependent on nothing but their own power. You're wrong, Naruto countered, dodging a wave of ice that erupted towards him. My friends are the reason I have strength. They're the ones who pulled me out of the dark. Fighting for them is what gives my power meaning. He formed a Rasenshuriken, its piercing shriek a stark contrast to the encroaching cold. He hurled it. The attack tore across the battlefield, a spinning vortex of wind chakra that could sever connections on a cellular level. Esdeath simply raised a hand. An enormous, intricately carved flower of ice bloomed before her, its petals impossibly hard. The Rasenshuriken slammed into it, and for a moment, the two forces battled. The shriek of the wind jutsu fought against the silent, unyielding cold. The ice flower began to crack, fractures spreading across its surface, but it held just long enough. The Rasenshuriken detonated prematurely, its explosive force washing over Esdeath's defense harmlessly. Naruto stared, breathing heavily. He was throwing some of his most powerful attacks at her, and she was treating them like nuisances. He could feel Kurama stirring within him, a low growl of frustration. Let me out, Kit. This woman's power is unnatural. Let me burn it away. Not yet, Naruto thought back. This is my fight. I have to do this. Esdeath saw the hesitation, the flicker of internal conflict. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of disappointment. Are you faltering? I expected more. If this is the limit of your conviction, then you are not worthy. She raised her hand to the sky. Allow me to end this. You have been a fine appetizer, but the main course of this world awaits. The air grew still. The chaotic currents of the Nexus, the swirling lights, the distant chiming of glass continents, everything seemed to halt. A single word escaped her lips, a whisper that carried the weight of absolute zero. Mahapadma. And the world froze. Time itself came to a dead stop. Naruto was caught mid-stride, his expression a mask of grim determination. The dust kicked up by their battle hung suspended in the air. Esdeath walked calmly through the frozen tableau, the only thing in existence capable of movement. She approached the petrified form of her opponent, a long, elegant rapier of ice forming in her hand. This is true power, Naruto Uzumaki. The power to command reality itself. To stop the very flow of time. Against this, your bonds and your sentiment are meaningless. She raised the blade, preparing to place its tip against Naruto's chest. It would not be a killing blow. She wanted to break his spirit, not his body. She wanted him to awaken from this and know he had been utterly, completely dominated. The strong live, she whispered, bringing the point of the rapier forward. The tip of the ice blade touched his jacket. And it stopped. Esdeath's eyes widened slightly. The blade wasn't moving. She pushed, but it met an infinitesimal resistance. It was impossible. Nothing could resist Mahapadma. Then she saw it. A faint, golden aura, almost imperceptible, was shimmering around Naruto's body. It was a power that sat outside the normal flow of time, a divine energy that answered to a higher law. The Sage of Six Paths, power. It wasn't enough to let him move, but it was enough to let him think. And deep within his sealed consciousness, Naruto was speaking to his partner. Kurama. Now, a cataclysmic roar of pure, unadulterated power erupted from within him. A sun bloomed in the frozen world. The golden aura exploded outward, a tidal wave of life and energy. That violently shattered Esdeath's time freeze. Time snapped back into place with the force of a thunderclap. Esdeath was thrown backward, skidding across the rocky ground, her ice rapier sublimating into mist. Naruto stood in the center of the crater, no longer in his normal sage mode. He was cloaked in a blazing shroud of yellow chakra, his body covered in the intricate black markings of the Nine Tails chakra mode. He was a miniature sun, a beacon of ferocious, burning life against the absolute zero of her power. The sun had risen to meet the ice. "My turn," he said, his voice now a layered chorus of his own and Kurama's. He vanished. He wasn't just fast, he was a precept of physics being rewritten. He appeared before Esdeath before she could even raise a defense, his fist connecting with her gut. The blow wasn't just physical, it was a detonation of pure chakra that sent her flying across the island, smashing through a rock pinnacle. She recovered instantly, her own power flaring to meet his. Yes, this is the power I sought. The final phase of the battle began. It was a contest of gods. Esdeath summoned colossal glaciers, attempting to crush him. Naruto, with Kurama's chakra arms, shattered them like glass. She created a legion of flying ice beasts. He obliterated them with a volley of miniature-tailed beast bombs. Their battle was no longer confined to the island, it spilled out into the Nexus itself. Their raw power obliterating smaller asteroids and sending ripples through the fabric of the dimension. Finally, they both knew it was time to end it. They stood on opposite ends of the ruined island. Gathering their ultimate attacks, Esdeath plunged her hands into the ground, drawing upon all of her reserves. The entire island began to glow with a pale blue light. "Ice Storm Emperor," she roared, and a figure of a titanic knight made of pure, compressed ice rose behind her, its sorta weapon capable of freezing a continent. Naruto created two clones. The Y stood on either side of him as he formed a recentricon of unprecedented scale, pouring his own chakra, sage energy, and Kurama's vast reserves into it. It became a spiraling star of golden wind and black, malevolent power. A sage art. Tailed beast bomb recentricon. The Ice Knight swung its colossal sword. Naruto and his clones hurled their ultimate attack. The two forces met in the middle of the island. For a moment, there was only light, a silent, all-consuming explosion of gold and blue that vaporized the island and a dozen more around it. When the light faded, they were both falling through the twilight sky. Esdeath was battered, her uniform torn, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had poured everything into that last attack. She was spent. Naruto was also drained, his chakra cloak flickering. But he had held back just enough. He flickered through the air, appearing above her. She looked up, expecting the final, killing blow. She met his eyes and saw no malice, no triumph. Only respect. He clapped his hands together. But it wasn't an attack. Uzumaki sealing technique. Adamantine chakra chains. Golden chains, formed not of metal but of pure, solidified chakra, erupted from his back. They were not weapons of destruction, but tools of binding. They shot forward, wrapping around Esdeath's limbs and torso, encasing her in a gentle but unbreakable prison. Her power, exhausted as it was, sputtered against the seals and was suppressed. He landed softly on another floating rock, gently lowering her down until she was standing before him, bound and helpless. He stood over her, his chakra cloak receding, leaving him in his tattered jacket. "You're strong," he said, his voice his own again. "Incredibly strong. Maybe the strongest I've ever fought." He looked her directly in the eyes. But strength isn't just about breaking things. With a thought, the golden chains dissolved into particles of light. She was free. He had won, completely and absolutely, and his final act was to show mercy. Esdeath simply stared, her mind reeling. He had defeated her. He had overcome her ultimate technique. He had the chance to end her, to prove his dominance in the way she understood, and he had refused. This was a form of strength her entire philosophy had no way to compute. It was illogical, it was sentimental, and it was, to her utter shock, magnificent. They returned to the observatory in silence. Yoruichi let out a low whistle from her perch. Rias's eyes were wide with a new level of strategic appreciation. Erza was smiling, a look of profound kinship on her face. But their return was met with a blaring alarm. On Rias's projected map, a new anomaly appeared. A fleet of sleek, silver ships, utterly alien in design, was approaching their position at incredible speed. The Nexus Council. Rias breathed, her expression hardening. They were drawn by the energy signature. As if on cue, the wards at the edge of their island flared as a small, battered-looking vessel, clearly running from the larger fleet, crash-landed just outside the observatory. The doors hissed open, and a group of terrified-looking individuals, humanoid, but with pale blue skin and feathery hair, stumbled out. Falling to their knees, their leader, an old man with eyes full of despair, looked at the 5 figures of immense power standing before him. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "Our world, it is being erased. The council, they would not help. They quarantine the dying. Please, grant us sanctuary." Rias immediately stepped forward, her mind racing through the strategic implications. "If we take them in, the council will know we are here. They will see us as a threat, another unstable element to be contained. We will be fighting a war on 2 fronts. The logical move is to turn them away." Her words were cold, pragmatic, and correct. But Naruto wasn't looking at the tactical display. He was looking at the faces of the refugees, at the children hiding behind their parents. Their eyes wide with a terror he knew all too well. He saw himself, a lonely child ostracized by a world that feared him. He walked past Rias, past the logical choice, and knelt before the old man. He placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "You're safe here," he said, his voice filled with an unwavering conviction that cut through all strategic debate. He stood and faced his new comrades, his gaze sweeping over them before landing on Esdeath. "We save them. If we sacrifice the innocent to win, we've already lost." It was not a suggestion. It was the declaration of a king. And, as Esdeath looked at him, the man who had defeated her not with overwhelming force, but with overwhelming mercy, the man who would now risk everything for a group of complete strangers, she felt the first true crack in the ice around her heart. It was a flicker of something she had never felt before. Not admiration for a predator, but respect for a leader. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Knight and the Jinchuriki. The observatory, now a functional fortress, had a newfound tension humming in its ancient stones. The Lyrian refugees, numbering just over 100, were quartered in a section of the observatory that Erza and Naruto's clones had hastily converted into living spaces. Their presence was a constant, sobering reminder of what was at stake. They were the last remnants of a world that no longer existed. Their memories the only proof it had ever been. Rias stood before the tactical map in the main concourse, her expression a mask of intense concentration. The map now showed the Nexus Council fleet holding a perimeter several sectors away, their patrol patterns a clear sign that they were searching, methodically and patiently. "They're sweeping the area," she announced, her voice sharp and clear, pulling everyone's attention. "The energy signature from your duel," she said, nodding to Naruto and Esdeath, was a flare in the darkness. "Our current wards are sufficient to hide us from a passing glance. But a focused scan will find us. We are living on borrowed time. So we fight them?" Erza asked, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of a sword that wasn't there. "We would be crushed," Rias stated flatly. "That is a military fleet from a council that has governed the Nexus for millennia. We are 5 individuals and a handful of loyal servants. We need more than a hiding place. We need to become invisible. A ghost." She zoomed the map in on a distant, pulsating star system, one that flickered erratically, as if it were a candle in a gale. "There is one artifact in the Nexus that can achieve such a thing, the Seed of Yggdrasil. It's an object of pure, condensed life magic from a world tree. Its power is generative, not destructive. If I can integrate its energy into my warding matrix, I can create a cloaking field that doesn't just block energy signatures, it will project a field of nothingness that even the Council's most sophisticated sensors will register as empty space. We will be perfectly hidden." "What's the catch?" Yoruichi asked, stretching on her rafter. "An item that powerful isn't just sitting on a shelf somewhere." Rias's expression tightened. "The catch is its location. It is on a world designated Lyria. And Lyria is in the final stages of erasure." The room went cold. They all knew what that meant now. A world not just dying, but being unwritten from history. "The process is not instantaneous," Rias continued, her voice grim. "The silent god's influence is like a disease. It corrupts and breaks down reality before the final consumption. The council has quarantined the entire system. No one goes in, no one comes out. According to the data Akano pulled from the astrolabe, the final erasure event is projected to occur within the next 12 hours. If we want the seed, we have to go in now, get past whatever horrors the erasure has created, and get out before the entire world ceases to exist. It was a suicide mission. A.D. Asperite gamble with the very fabric of reality as the stakes. Esdeath's eyes lit up with a familiar, dangerous fire. A race against oblivion itself. How exhilarating. Yoruichi leapt down from her perch, a grin spreading across her face. A high-speed smash and grab on a world that's falling apart. Sounds like my kind of party. Naruto looked at the Lyrian refugees huddled in a corner of the grand hall. Their feathery hair drooping with exhaustion and fear. He saw their children's eyes, and in them, he saw the future he was fighting for. There was no choice to be made. Then what are we waiting for? He said. Erza stood silently, her scarlet hair framing a face carved from stone. Her gaze was fixed on the flickering image of the dying world. There was no excitement in her eyes, only a deep, somber resolve. She had seen worlds break before. She knew the cost. With a powerful surge of demonic energy, Rias tore open a transport portal, its crimson depths swirling with the promise of SSAGE to a place that was already a ghost. The seed is in the Royal Conservatory, in the heart of the capital city, Alani. That is our target. Move quickly, stay together, and do not let the world's despair take root in you. What you are about to see will be unpleasant. They stepped through the portal, and the serene, ordered reality of the observatory vanished, replaced by a world's dying scream. Lyria was a nightmare. The sky was the color of old blood, choked with sickly green clouds that rained a fine, gray ash. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the faint, discordant sound of a world's song ending. They stood on a cracked and broken highway overlooking the capital city of Alani. The city wasn't in ruins, not in the traditional sense. It was worse. It was fading. Entire buildings were translucent, their edges blurring into the ashen air. Sections of the street simply weren't there, replaced by patches of static gray nothingness that seemed to suck the very light out of the air. And then there were the people. Or what was left of them. They moved through the spectral streets like ghosts, their forms flickering, their faces blank and devoid of all hope. Some were CMPLY sitting in the middle of the street, staring into nothingness as the world dissolved around them. Others were being herded by monstrous creatures that seemed to be born from the decay itself. They were vaguely humanoid, made of the same gray static as the holes in the world, their limbs twitching with unnatural, spasmodic energy. They were the echoes. Erza's breath hitched in her throat. Her eyes, wide with a dawning horror, were fixed on a group of Lyrians being forced by the echoes to tear down a statue in the city square. They were slaves, their bodies gaunt, their movements slow and listless. Driven only by the prodding of the monsters behind them. They were building nothing, only destroying, their labor utterly meaningless in the face of their world's end. The scene was a direct, visceral blow to her soul. She was no longer Erza Scarlet, Titania, Queen of the Fairies. She was a small, terrified girl again, with matted red hair and bare feet, hauling stones under a cruel sun to build the Tower of Heaven. She could almost feel the phantom sting of the lash on her back, the gnawing hunger in her belly, the crushing, absolute despair of a life that was not her own. Erza. Naruto's voice was a distant sound. Her expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of ice. The warmth in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard fury. These things, they must be purged. Her voice was clipped, emotionless. Before anyone could stop her, she leapt from the highway, landing in the city square below with a ground-shaking impact. Requip. Purgatory armor. Her body was instantly clad in black, spiked plate armor, a demonic and terrifying visage. In her hand was a massive, spiked mace. She moved with a speed and brutality that was shocking even to the others. She didn't fight like a knight. She fought like an executioner. Each swing of her mace didn't just defeat the echoes, it obliterated them, splattering their gray forms into static that was quickly consumed by the decaying air. She was a whirlwind of black steel and righteous fury, her movements devoid of their usual grace, replaced by a terrible, focused efficiency. Erza, wait, we need to stick to the plan. Rias called out. But her words were lost in the carnage. Let her go, Esdeath said, a note of clinical appreciation in her voice. She is rage personified. It is a beautiful sight. Naruto watched her, a knot of concern tightening in his stomach. This wasn't the Erza he had spoken to on the balcony. This was a different person, someone who had locked her heart away and thrown away the key. He created a dozen shadow clones. Go. Back her up. Don't get in her way, just watch her back. The clones fanned out, following in Erza's wake. The group descended into the dying city, their mission now a running battle. Yoruichi became a golden blur, scouting ahead, dismantling echo patrols before they could form up. Rias and Akino provided ranged support, their demonic magic and lightning blasting holes in the enemy ranks. Esdeath fought with a cold, elegant lethality, freezing entire platoons of echoes solid and shattering them with a casual gesture, all while observing the world's decay with an unnerving intellectual curiosity. But the tip of their spear was Erza. She was relentless, pushing forward with a reckless abandon that bordered on suicidal. She carved a straight, bloody path toward the city center, leaving a trail of dissolving echoes behind her. Naruto stayed close, not engaging her directly, but fighting in her shadow. His senses, heightened by sage mode, were attuned to her every move. When a massive, brute-like echo with 4 arms burst from a dissolving building to ambush her from the right, a blind spot in the purgatory armor's massive pauldrons, a Naruto clone was already there. A Rasengan slammed into the creature's side, turning it to static before it could even swing. Erza didn't acknowledge the assist, she just kept moving forward. She re-equipped into her Flame Empress armor, unleashing a torrent of fire that incinerated a wave of smaller, faster echoes. As she did, Naruto subtly used a wind style, great breakthrough jutsu, feeding the flames, turning her firestorm into a raging inferno that cleared half a street. Again, she gave no sign that she noticed. They were a perfect, deadly duo, but only one of them seemed to be aware of it. Deeper into the city, the decay grew worse. The laws of physics began to fray. Gravity would shift unexpectedly, and corridors would lead back to where they started. It was a disorienting, maddening environment designed to break the spirit. It seemed only to fuel Erza's cold rage. They reached the Royal Conservatory, a magnificent glass dome that was miraculously still mostly intact, though its edges were beginning to flicker and fade. Inside, the plants were all dead, turned to gray ash, but in the very center, on a raised dais, was a single, luminous seed, no bigger than a human heart. It pulsed with a soft, green light, a defiant spark of life in a world of death. Guarding it was the most powerful echo they had yet seen. It was colossal, a fusion of dozens of the smaller creatures, its form constantly shifting, its many limbs lashing out with devastating force. It was the concentrated despair of the dying world. Erza didn't hesitate. Re-equip adamantine armor. She became a fortress of diamond-hard shields, planting herself before the beast, taking the brunt of its furious assault. The monster's blows were like cannon fire, each impact shaking the entire conservatory, but her armor held. She was an immovable object. Now, she grunted through clenched teeth. It was the opening they needed. Rias gathered her power of destruction. Esdeath summoned a gigantic ice meteor from the decaying sky. Yoruichi prepared for a full-power Shunko strike. But Naruto was already moving. He knew what Erza was doing. She wasn't just defending. She was creating a bastion, a single point of stability for him to launch his attack. Trusting her completely, he had already formed a tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken. He leapt over her shielded form, a golden comet of annihilating power, and drove the attack straight into the monster's core. The resulting explosion was silent, a flash of light that simply unmade the creature, erasing the erased. In the ringing silence that followed, Erza's armor dissipated, leaving her standing in her simple fighting tunic, breathing heavily. She walked to the dais and gently picked up the seed of Yggdrasil. Its warm, living light seemed to push back the oppressive gloom. "We have it," she said, her voice still cold, still distant. "Let's go." But as she turned, the world gave a final, shuddering groan. The soft green light of the seed was the only illumination as the blood-red sky outside the dome went black. The last, flickering buildings of Alani dissolved into nothing. The ground beneath their feet turned to gray, featureless dust. The sound, the ash, the very air, it all just stopped. They were standing on a patch of dead earth in a featureless, black void. The sun of Lyria had been extinguished. The world was gone. The absolute, profound emptiness was a horror beyond comprehension. It was the sight of a god's indifference. Rias quickly opened a portal back to the observatory. They stepped through, leaving the dead void behind them. The warm light of their sanctuary a shocking contrast. The mission was a success. They were safe. But no one felt victorious. Later, Naruto found Erza on the same balcony where they had first spoken. She stood gripping the railing, her knuckles white, staring out at the chaotic but vibrant sea of the Nexus. She was staring at anything that wasn't the empty blackness she had just witnessed. The seed of Yggdrasil, now in Rias's possession, was already being integrated into the observatory's wards, but its gentle warmth couldn't reach the chill that had settled deep in Erza's soul. Naruto didn't say anything. He just came and stood beside her, his presence a quiet, unwavering support. They stood in silence for a long time, watching shattered worlds drift by. Finally, her voice, small and fragile, broke the quiet. That's how it was. In the tower, Naruto remained silent, listening. We were slaves, she continued, her gaze fixed on a distant, broken moon. Children. They worked us until we collapsed. If we cried, we were punished. If we spoke of hope, we were tortured. So we learned not to feel. We built a paradise for our masters, and our reward was to be buried within it. That's C.I.T.Y. Those people, they had the same eyes we did. The eyes of people who have already accepted they are dead. Her shoulders began to shake, a tremor she couldn't control. I was so angry. I saw them, and all I could feel was the rage I felt back then. I thought if I just destroyed enough, if I was just strong enough, I could break it. I could make it stop. But I couldn't. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I have all this power, all this armor, but I stood there and watched a whole world die, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Naruto finally spoke, his voice low and gentle. When I was a kid, everyone in my village looked at me with those same eyes. Not empty. Worse. Full of hate. They saw me as a monster. A demon fox that had destroyed their homes. For a long time, I believed them. I figured if I was going to be a monster, I should be the strongest one there is. He looked out at the Nexus. I built up walls. I was loud and stupid and picked fights with everyone. Ought if I could just get everyone to look at me, to acknowledge me, even with hate, it would be better than being alone. Better than being nothing. He took a breath. It wasn't until I had people who were willing to stand beside me, even when I was at my worst, that I realized being strong wasn't about pushing everyone away. It was about having something worth protecting. He turned to her, and for the first time, she met his gaze. In his blue eyes, she saw no pity. She saw a reflection of her own pain, her own solitude, her own fierce, desperate struggle to find a reason to be strong. He understood. He didn't need to have lived her life to understand her heart. You weren't alone down there, Erza, he said softly. I was with you, every step. The dam broke. The cold fury, the iron control. The years of pain she had forged into armor, it all crumbled. Sobs racked her body, and she leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, not as a warrior, not as Titania, but as a woman. Ho had carried an impossible burden for far too long. Naruto didn't flinch. He just stood there, a solid, unwavering presence in the storm, his hand resting gently on her back, a silent promise that she no longer had to bear it alone. The night had found her anchor, and the Jinchuriki had found a kindred soul. Their bond, forged in the quiet darkness at the end of a world, was now unbreakable. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Devil's Gambit. The observatory hummed with a new kind of silence. Rias stood at the central dais, her hands spread over the reawakened controls, her demonic energy woven into the very fabric of the ancient stone. The seed of Yggdrasil, cradled in a containment field at the heart of the structure, pulsed with a gentle, viridian light. Its life-giving magic flowed through the wards Rias had erected, not just hiding them, but creating a perfect illusion of emptiness. To any sensor, any magical scan, their island fortress simply did not exist. They were a ghost in the machine of the Nexus. The success was palpable, a brief moment to breathe in a war that had been a sprint from the very beginning. Erza was overseeing the training of the Lyrian refugees who were willing to learn self-defense. Her voice firm but patient. Yoruichi was napping in a sunbeam that pierced the shattered dome, the picture of lazy contentment. Esdeath was on a remote part of the island, locked in what she called meditation, which involved creating and then shattering glaciers the size of small mountains. Naruto was with the Lyrian children, performing a simple transformation jutsu to look like one of their folk heroes. A tale he'd had their elder tell him. The sound of their laughter, real and genuine for the first time since their arrival, was a more potent victory than any battle he had won. It was into this fragile peace that the summons arrived. It did not come as a ship or a messenger. It was an imposition of will. A single, perfect scroll of shimmering, silver energy materialized in the air in the center of the main concourse, hovering for a moment before unfurling. The script was alien, yet its meaning was imprinted directly into their minds, a telepathic command that bypassed language. The Nexus Council formally requests the presence of the 5 trans-dimensional belligerents at the Praxium for a hearing regarding your recent unsanctioned activities. Compliance is not optional. The laughter of the children died in Naruto's ears. Yoruichi was awake instantly, her lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a predator. Erza appeared moments later, her expression grim. Esdeath arrived on a wave of cold air, a curious, almost eager, glint in her eyes. The scroll was an unignorable declaration. Their invisibility had bought them time, but it had not bought them amnesty. So much for being a ghost, Yoruichi commented dryly, hopping down from a ledge to inspect the shimmering scroll. They cannot find us, but they know we are here, Rias said, her hands leaving the controls as she analyzed the summons. This isn't a search party. This is a trap. They are casting a net across the entire nexus, and we are the only ones who can hear the command. If we do not answer, we are declared fugitives by default, and they will escalate their hunt from a patrol to a full-scale eradication campaign. If we do answer, we walk directly into their seat of power, where we will be judged and undoubtedly sentenced. Esdeath scoffed, a plume of frigid air escaping her lips. Let them come. We defeated their vanguard. We can break their council. That was not their vanguard. It was a single patrol squadron, likely the most zealous and least disciplined of their forces, Rias corrected, her tone sharp. And they did not engage us directly. You cannot win a war against an enemy who holds all the territory and all the resources by simply waiting for them to knock down your door. That is how rebellions die. Erza nodded in agreement, but to walk in willingly feels like surrender. We would be on their terms, in their territory. All eyes turned to Naruto. He had been silent, staring at the scroll, his sage's senses telling him Rias was right. This was not a physical threat, not yet. It was a move on a board he didn't fully understand. He looked at Rias, at the calm, calculating intelligence in her eyes. This was her battlefield. What's your plan? He asked, the question a clear deferral of command. A small, confident smile touched Rias's lips. She had been waiting for him to ask. My plan, she began, the energy in the room shifting as she took control, is that we accept their invitation. But we do not go as criminals to be judged. We go as envoys, as the fulfillment of the prophecy they so clearly fear. They want to put us on trial. Fine, we will put them on trial for their inaction against the silent God. She began to pace, her mind working at lightning speed. They will accuse us of crimes. We will reframe them as necessities. They will call us a threat to stability. We will prove that we are the only hope for survival. This is not a battle of strength, it is a battle of narrative. And we are going to seize it from them. She stopped and looked directly at Naruto. And that is where you come in. Erza, Yoruichi, Esdeath, your roles are to be a silent, intimidating presence. A council of queens flanking their king. But you, Naruto, have the most important role of all. You will not be a diplomat. You will not argue. You will not negotiate. What will I do? He asked. You will be you, she said, her eyes gleaming with strategic fire. You will be the charismatic, confident leader who has faced down gods and monsters. But underneath that, you will be the living embodiment of untamable, world-breaking power. You are the reason they are afraid. You will stand there and, without saying a word, you will make every single one of those ancient, arrogant beings understand that if this hearing does not go your way, you are perfectly capable of tearing their precious praxium down to its foundations. I will be the voice of reason. You will be the threat of annihilation. The perfect political gambit. Naruto understood. It was a role he'd played before, whether he knew it or not. He was the unpredictable variable, the one who broke the rules of the game. He grinned. All right, let's go have a talk. Rias used the summon scroll itself as a magical anchor, tearing open a portal directly to the coordinates it provided. They stepped through and found themselves in a place of awesome, intimidating scale. The praxium was a vast, circular chamber built into the heart of a hollowed-out moon. The ceiling was a dome of pure, transparent crystal that showed the swirling chaos of the nexus beyond. In the center of the chamber was a raised, circular platform where the council sat, arranged in a semicircle of ornate, high-backed thrones. They were a menagerie of ancient power. A hulking, draconic being in obsidian armor, smoke curling from his nostrils. A slender figure made of living, crystalline light that chimed softly as it moved. A robed entity whose face was a swirling vortex of stars. And in the central, most ornate throne, sat Praetor Valerius. He was humanoid, appearing as a man in his late prime, with silver hair and eyes that shone with the cold, hard light of a distant star. He radiated an aura of absolute order, of millennia spent enforcing a rigid, unyielding peace. They stood on a platform below the council, the accused in the well of the court. Dozens of heavily armed guards, clad in silver armor and wielding weapons of light, lined the chamber's walls. Praetor Valerius's voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates, ancient and utterly devoid of warmth. You have come, flick, of wisdom in a maelstrom of foolishness. He did not wait for a reply. You are charged with the following transgressions against the ordained laws of the Nexus. 1. The unsanctioned traversing of dimensional barriers, causing tears in the fabric of local realities. 2. The harboring of unvetted refugees from a quarantined zone, threatening the integrity of this sector. And 3. The wielding of chaotic and destructive energies on a scale that has not been seen in this nexus since the primordial wars, directly contributing to the instability you claim to oppose. He leaned forward, his stellar eyes fixing on them. You are a cancer, a chaotic element that threatens to undo eons of stability. How do you answer these charges? Rias stepped forward, her crimson hair a slash of defiance in the cold, silver hall. Her voice was calm, respectful, but held an iron core. Praetor Valerius, members of the council, we are not belligerents, we are survivors. We did not choose to come to your nexus, we were pulled here. A symptom of the very instability you have proven incapable of containing. She gestured elegantly. You charge us with harboring fugitives. We charge you with abandoning them. We gave sanctuary to the last survivors of a world you sentenced to death by quarantine. We believe that an order that sacrifices the innocent for its own convenience is an order not worth preserving. Is compassion now a crime here? Quote, a murmur went through the less rigid members of the council. Valerius's expression hardened. And finally, Rias continued, her voice rising with controlled passion. You charge us with wielding destabilizing power. That power you witnessed was not an act of aggression. It was a desperate battle for survival against a herald of the silent god, a vanguard of the all-consuming void that you know is coming. A threat that grows stronger with every moment you spend debating procedure and enforcing quarantines that do nothing to solve the actual problem. We fought. We bled. We won. Where were you? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Valerius's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fire. Your motivations are irrelevant. Your actions have consequences. Your power is unregulated. Your presence a threat. By the laws of this council, you are to be detained. Your abilities will be bound, your futures, determined. Guards, take them. The silver, armored guards took a synchronized step forward, their weapons of light flaring to life. Esdeath's hand began to glow with a chilling frost. Erza's fingers twitched, ready to summon 100 swords. But Naruto simply took one step forward. He did nothing else. He didn't power up, he didn't shout. He just moved, planting his foot on the stone floor. But in that single, simple motion, he allowed a fraction of his true power. The divine gift of the Sage of Six Paths, to flare for a single, controlled instant. A web of cracks spread out from under his boot, racing across the polished floor of the grand chamber. A wave of pure, Unimaginable pressure washed over the room, a pressure that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with presence. It was the weight of a being who had communed with the soul of the world, who had held the fate of millions in his hands and emerged victorious. The council members, ancient and powerful as they were, recoiled in their thrones. The draconic being let out an involuntary hiss. The crystalline entity's chiming became discordant and panicked. The guards froze in place, their weapons flickering, every instinct they possessed screaming at that the being before them was not something they could fight. He was an event, a law of nature. Naruto lifted his gaze, his calm, blue eyes meeting the praetor's furious stare. And he spoke, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. I don't think so. The silence that followed was absolute. Valerius was speechless, his authority utterly and completely undermined by 2 words and a single step. Rias seized the moment, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a diamond. You see us as a threat, praetor. You are correct, but we are not a threat to the Nexus. We are a threat to the silence. She spread her arms, encompassing her allies. The prophecy has begun. We are the 5 worlds united. We are the weapon you need but are too afraid to wield. So we offer you a choice. Not as your subjects, but as your equals. A pact of non-interference. You will stay out of our way, and we will be the shield that stands between the Nexus and the Great Nothing. We will fight the war you are too complacent to wage. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that every member of the council could hear. Your only other choice is to try and make us your enemies. And before you decide, I urge you to look at the man standing before you and ask yourselves, honestly, is that a war you believe you can win? The council was broken. Valerius was apoplectic with rage. But he had lost the room. Other members were looking at Naruto, then at Rias, their ancient minds calculating odds, weighing the cost. Annihilation from the silent god was a certainty. Annihilation from this group was a terrifying possibility. The choice was clear. The draconic being rumbled, his voice like an avalanche. The Grimoire speaks with a certain logic. The pact is acceptable. One by one, others voiced their assent. The motion was carried. They had won. Back in the observatory, the portal closing behind them, the tension finally broke. Yoruichi let out a whoop of laughter. I have to admit, that was more entertaining than a fight. The look on that old fossil's face. Erza was smiling, a look of deep admiration for Rias's tactical genius. It was a victory of the mind, as impressive as any feat of arms. Naruto gave Rias a wide, sunny grin. You were amazing, like Shikamaru, but with way better hair. Rias, who had maintained a perfect composure throughout the entire ordeal, felt a genuine flush of pride and exhilaration. It was a victory unlike any she had ever achieved in the underworld. It was cleaner, more absolute. They had faced down an ancient power and bent it to their will without spilling a single drop of blood. And she had done it with him. With his unwavering trust, with his perfect understanding of the role he had to play. Later, she found him on the balcony, watching the cosmic ballet of the Nexus. She came to stand beside him, the silence comfortable and charged. You trusted me completely back there, she said, her voice softer than usual. Even when I asked you to do nothing but stand still. Of course, Naruto said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That's your arena. I'm the guy who punches things. You're the one who tells me where to punch. And when not to. She laughed, a genuine, musical sound. The synergy between them was palpable. His simple, straightforward trust in her intellect was more intoxicating than any flattery she had ever received. Her strategic mind, honed by the cutthroat politics of hell, had found its perfect counterpart in his pure, overwhelming power. He didn't just follow her plan, he amplified it, became the core of it. She looked from his smiling face out to the endless, swirling chaos of the Nexus. A universe of possibilities, of dangers, of adventures. And she was facing it with him. A slow, dangerous, exhilarating smile spread across her face. You and I, she said, her voice a low murmur that was equal parts promise and threat, are going to be a most terrifying combination. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A game of cat and fox. The pact with the council was not peace, it was a ceasefire. A cold war played out in the silent depths of the Nexus. They were left alone. But they were also isolated, a rogue state of 5 people on a floating island. The victory in the Praxium had been a battle of wills, but Rias knew the true war would be one of information. She stood before the Grand Astrolabe in the observatory's heart, which she had jury-rigged with demonic magic to serve as a threat assessment map. The silent god was a formless, pervasive threat, its movements seemingly random. "We're fighting blind," she stated, her voice echoing in the vast, quiet hall. The others were gathered, the brief respite of their victory already fading. The erasure of Lyria was not a targeted attack. It was a symptom of a larger pattern. The silent god is a predator, and it is drawn to certain feeding grounds. Worlds that are old, rich in life force, or possess unique dimensional properties. But we don't know where it will strike next. We can't be reactive. We must be predictive. "Is there a way?" Erza asked, ever practical. It was Yoruichi who answered, hopping down from a high archway where she'd been observing the proceedings. A sly, knowing grin was plastered on her face. "There are always whispers in a place like this, if you know how to listen. I've been networking." She'd spent the last cycle of Nexus Light, exploring the shadier corners of the dimensional crossroads, the information markets and smuggler outposts. "There's a legend, an artifact from a race of chronomancers. Wiped out eons ago. They called it the Chrono Compass. It doesn't point north. It points to the greatest temporal spatial anomaly in the Nexus, the next point of major reality distortion. The next place the silent god is likely to feed." Naruto's eyes lit up. "Awesome. So where is it?" "Ah, there's the rub," Yoruichi said, her grin widening. "It's not for sale. She's sitting in the private collection of the one person in this entire multiverse who would rather see us erased than proven right." Rias's eyes narrowed. She didn't need to ask. "Praetor Valerius." "Bingo," Yoruichi confirmed. "He keeps it in his personal sanctum, a moonlet called Aegis 7. It's a fortress, a museum, and a testament to his own ego. Asking for it is out of the question." "Then we will take it," Esdeath stated, her voice dripping with relish for the potential conflict. Rias shook her head. A frontal assault on the Praetor's personal fortress would be an open declaration of war on the Council. It would invalidate our pact and unite all his political rivals against us. We cannot win that way. She looked from Esdeath's brute force to Erza's knightly honor. This mission required a different touch. Her gaze settled on the 2 fastest, most unpredictable members of their group. "This is not a battle. This is a theft. It requires speed, stealth, and an absolute minimum of collateral damage." The implication was clear. Yoruichi's grin became feral. She looked at Naruto, a challenge glittering in her golden eyes. "What do you say, Foxy? Feel like breaking into a stuffy old man's house and stealing his favorite toy?" Naruto's own grin was a mirror of hers. The thrill of a high-stakes, impossible mission was an old and welcome friend. "Only if you can keep up, cat lady." The plan was simple in concept, nightmarish in execution. Rias, using her Grimoire family's vast network of infernal intelligence contacts, would engineer a minor political crisis in a distant sector, a situation that Valerius, as Praetor, would be obligated to oversee personally. This would give them a narrow window. During that window, Yoruichi and Naruto would infiltrate Aegis 7, navigate its defenses, retrieve the compass, and escape before anyone was the wiser. Hours later, they stood on a barren asteroid, a speck of rock floating in the void, looking out at the target. Aegis 7 was a small, perfectly spherical moonlet, its surface a gleaming, seamless expanse of silver metal. Dozens of automated defense platforms drifted in silent, intricate patrol patterns around it. "All right, here's the game," Yoruichi said, stretching like a sprinter at the starting block. "Rias's diversion starts in 10 minutes. That's when the outer sensor grid will be rerouted for a fraction of a second. We have to be inside by then." The sanctum itself is a maze of kinetic, arcane, and temporal traps, leading to the central vault. It's a race against the clock. First one to the vault door gets to pick our victory dinner. "Hope you like ramen," Naruto shot back, already buzzing with energy. "I was thinking something a little more refined," she purred. "Try to keep up." The moment Rias's signal aim, a psychic pulse only they could feel, they exploded into motion. Naruto created 100 shadow clones that scattered in every direction, a chaotic swarm designed to give the automated turrets 1,000 false targets. Under the cover of this diversion, the real duo moved. They were a symphony of speed. Yoruichi's Shunpo was a series of instantaneous, silent jumps, leaving no trace. Naruto's body flicker was a continuous, golden blur. They moved through the web of patrol drones like ghosts, weaving through laser grids with inches to spare. Their movements were not just parallel, they were intertwined. Naruto would draw the attention of a drone, and Yoruichi would flicker past in the blind spot he created. She would disable a sensor panel, and he would already be moving through the gap it opened. There was no need for words. They communicated with glances, with the subtle shift of their bodies, a perfectly synchronized dance of infiltration. They reached the moonlet's surface, slipping through an exhaust port just as the sensor grid snapped back into place. The interior of Aegis 7 was as cold and sterile as its master. Corridors of polished chrome stretched into infinity, bathed in a cold, white light. "Piece of cake," Naruto whispered, grinning. "Don't get cocky," Yoruichi whispered back, her senses on high alert. "We're just past the welcome mat." She was right. As they entered the first major corridor, Naruto's Sage Mode screamed a warning. He tackled Yoruichi, pulling them both to the floor just as the space where they had been standing simply ceased to be. There was no sound, no flash of light. A perfectly silent, perfectly invisible beam of spatial energy had erased a 5-meter section of the corridor. "Okay," Naruto breathed, his heart pounding. "Not a piece of cake." "Spatial displacement traps," Yoruichi analyzed, her expression sharp. "Nasty. They don't trigger on pressure or motion, but on the disruption of ambient energy. Our bodies moving through the air sets them off." She pointed down the hall. "We have to move without moving." Naruto understood. He created a single shadow clone, which took one step and was promptly erased. But its brief essence gave Naruto the sensory feedback he needed. He could feel the wrongness in the air now, the invisible lines of the trap. "I can see them. Follow my lead. Step where I step." He began to move in a bizarre, zigzagging pattern. A dance across the invisible safe zones. Yoruichi followed him perfectly, her movements a mirror of his own. Their trust was absolute, their steps falling in perfect rhythm. The next challenge was a long hallway where time itself was distorted. Pockets of accelerated and decelerated time dotted the corridor like invisible bubbles. Yoruichi took the lead this time, her vast experience with Kido allowing her to spot the subtle, shimmering edges of the temporal fields. "Stick close. One wrong step and you could age 1,000 years or be frozen until the heat death of the universe." They navigated the maze, at one moment moving at a snail's pace through a slow field, the next rocketing through an acceleration zone. It was a dizzying, disorienting experience that required perfect control. Finally, they arrived. A massive, circular door of solid obsidian stood before them, runes of power glowing faintly on its surface. "The vault. I win," Naruto declared, slapping his hand on the door a split second before Yoruichi. She rolled her eyes, but a smirk played on her lips. "Fine. Ramen it is. Now, how do we open it?" The door had no visible lock, but Naruto's Sage Mode could feel the immense, complex web of energy flowing through it. It was a seal, more intricate than anything he had ever seen. While Naruto studied the seal, Yoruichi's cat-like ears twitched. "Company." From the shadows at the end of the hall, they emerged. 3 figures, clad in form-fitting black armor that seemed to absorb the light. They were Valerius's Praetorian Guard, silent and deadly. They didn't wield weapons of light, they held blades of solidified shadow. There was no negotiation. The guards blurred into motion, attacking with silent, lethal precision. Yoruichi met one head-on. Her movements a whirlwind of strikes and dodges. She wasn't using her full-power shunko, just pure, refined hakuda. It was a deadly ballet of close-quarters combat. Naruto faced the other two. He created a Rasengan, but compressed it down to the size of a marble, a whirling point of devastating power. He dodged a shadow blade and thrust the pinpoint Rasengan into the guard's chest. There was no explosion, just a silent implosion as the guard's energy core was annihilated from the inside. The third guard lunged, but Naruto was already gone, a substitution jutsu leaving a chrome panel in his place. He reappeared behind the guard, a kunai at its throat. The fight was over in less than 10 seconds. Show off, Yoruichi quipped, dusting her hands off as her own opponent lay crumpled on the floor. Naruto grinned and turned his attention back to the vault. Okay, I think I've got it. He explained the flow of energy to Yoruichi. It was a multi-layered seal that required 3 different types of energy to be applied simultaneously to specific points. One was raw chakra. The second was the unique spiritual energy of a Shinigami. The third was natural energy. It was a lock that, in theory, no single being could open. But we're not a single being, Yoruichi said, her eyes gleaming as she understood. Naruto created a clone to handle the natural energy input. He placed his own hand on another point, channeling his chakra. Yoruichi placed her hand on the final point, pouring her Raryoku into it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the intricate runes glowed brightly. And the massive obsidian door slid silently open. The vault was a treasure trove of cosmic artifacts, but in the center, floating in an anti-gravity field, was a beautiful, complex astrolabe made of gold and sapphire. The chrono compass. Naruto grabbed it just as a blaring alarm echoed through the entire moonlit. Their time was up. So much for stealth, Naruto yelled over the din. Stealth was for getting in. Yoruichi shot back, a wild grin on her face. Getting out is all about style. The escape was a mad, chaotic dash. Guards swarmed the corridors. Naruto used a massive multi-shadow clone jutsu, flooding the sanctum with 1,000 orange-clad decoys that created a system-wide panic. Amidst the chaos, he and Yoruichi blasted their way out, a combined force of golden energy and purple lightning. They blew a hole in the side of the moonlit and shot out into the void, landing on their getaway asteroid just as Aegis 7 went on full lockdown, its surface bristling with weapons platforms firing at phantoms. They stood on the rock, breathing heavily, the adrenaline of the mission singing in their veins. The chrono compass was safe in Naruto's hand. They had done it. Yoruichi started to laugh, a deep, throaty sound of pure exhilaration. Naruto joined in, the sheer audacity of what they had just pulled off hitting him. They were a perfect team. You know, Yoruichi said, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye as she leaned against a rock formation. For a knucklehead, you're not a bad partner. You're not so bad yourself, Naruto said, walking over to her, his grin never leaving his face. Even if you did almost let me win the race. Oh, I let you win, she teased, poking him in the chest. Good for your ego. He caught her hand, his expression still playful. My ego's fine. They stood there for a moment, caught in the afterglow of their victory, the playful energy between them crackling like static. Her golden eyes locked with his blue ones. The thrill of the chase, the perfect synergy, the shared adrenaline, it all culminated in this single, charged moment. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was not gentle or romantic. It was electric, spontaneous, and full of the same wild energy that had fueled their entire mission. It was a collision of two free spirits, a spark of lightning and a flash of gold, tasting of victory and the promise of more adventures to come. They broke apart, both slightly breathless, a shared, surprised smile on their faces. The alarm klaxons from Aegis 7 were a faint, distant echo. Yoruichi picked up the crow. No compass from where Naruto had set it down. Its sapphire needle was already beginning to glow, slowly turning to point toward a new, unknown destination in the vast, dark sea of the Nexus. Their game was over, but the hunt was about to begin. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Hearts united, fortress besieged. A strange, almost domestic rhythm had settled over the observatory. It was the quiet hum of a fortress preparing for war, a brief, precious calm before the inevitable storm. Rias stood before the chrono compass, which now sat integrated into the central astrolabe. Its sapphire needle glowed with an unsteady light, flickering between several points in the vast cosmic sea of the Nexus. The readings are unstable, she announced to the others, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silent god is not moving towards a single world, but seems to be resonating with several. Its hunger is growing, becoming less focused. It gives us time, but it also means the next threat could be on a scale we haven't yet anticipated. Her words, dire as they were, did not disrupt the new atmosphere. The Lyrian refugees, emboldened by the group's protection, had started to rebuild their lives within the ancient stone walls. Erza was in the main courtyard, patiently demonstrating basic sword forms to a handful of young, eager Lyrians. Her voice was firm, the commands of a knight, but her eyes held a GE.NTLE warmth that had not been there before. She wasn't just training soldiers, she was giving hope back to a people who had lost everything. On a high balcony, Esdeath was engaged in a tense standoff with Yoruichi. Esdeath had created an intricate, beautiful, and lethally sharp sculpture of ice, a dragon locked in combat with a tiger. Yoruichi, lounging on the railing, was giving a running critique. The form is a little derivative, don't you think? She teased, inspecting her nails. And the tiger's tail is too stiff. It lacks flair. Esdeath's eye twitched. With a flick of her wrist, the tiger's ice tail lashed out, stopping a millimeter from Yoruichi's nose. Perhaps a live demonstration would be more instructive. Yoruichi didn't even flinch, simply grinning. Now that's more like it. Naruto stood in the archway of the main concourse, watching it all. He watched Rias, the brilliant commander organizing their future. He watched Erza, the stoic shield finding a new purpose in nurturing the weak. He watched Yoruichi and Esdeath, two predators who had found a strange, dangerous respect for one another. They were a chaotic, impossible, and utterly brilliant collection of souls. They had fought, bled, and planned together. They had saved each other. They had become something more than an alliance. He felt a clarity settle over him, a quiet, simple truth that cut through all the chaos of their situation. This was his place. These were his people. He walked out to the courtyard. Erza, can I borrow you for a minute? He then looked up at the balcony. You too as well. And Rias, step away from the map for a bit. There's something we need to talk about. His tone was not demanding, but it held a new kind of gravity that made them all pause. One by one, they gathered on the grand balcony overlooking the Nexus. The same spot where he and Erza had shared their vulnerabilities. The swirling chaos of broken worlds was a fitting backdrop. Naruto leaned against the railing, his back to the cosmos, facing the four women who had fundamentally changed his world. He didn't have a grand speech prepared. He just had the truth. When I was pulled here, he began, his voice steady and clear. I thought I'd lost everything. My home, my friends, my purpose. All I knew was how to fight for them. But here, with you guys, I've found a new one. He looked at Rias first. Rias, you see the whole board. You think 10 steps ahead when I'm still figuring out the first one. My power is just power. You give it a purpose, a direction. I've never trusted anyone's mind the way I trust yours. Rias's usually composed expression softened, a genuine warmth filling her eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned to Erza. Erza, you and I, we're the same. We carry scars that nobody else can see. We built ourselves up to be shields for others. When I stood with you at the end of your world, I wasn't just protecting you. I felt like I was standing with the only other person in the universe who truly gets it. Your strength makes my own stronger. A faint, beautiful smile graced Erza's lips. She understood completely. His gaze shifted to Yoruichi, who was watching him with an unusually serious, focused expression. Yoruichi, you're free. You remind me that a fight can be fun, that life is meant to be lived, not just endured. You're the flash of lightning in the middle of the storm. Being with you, whether we're racing or fighting or just talking, it makes me feel alive. Yoruichi's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a soft, genuine smile that reached her golden eyes. Finally, he looked at Esdeath. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of cold neutrality, but her eyes were fixed on him, waiting. This was the most difficult part. Esdeath, he said, his voice dropping slightly. Everyone, including you, thinks your strength is that you love to fight. That you want to break everything. But I don't think that's it. I saw it when we fought. It's not about destruction. It's about passion. You have more fire in you than anyone I've ever met. You just point it all at battle. I don't want to tame that fire. I want to stand next to it. I want to give it something more than just enemies to burn. He looked at all of them, the four pillars of his new world. I'm not a king. Not really. I'm just a guy who's good at fighting and better at finding people worth fighting for. The prophecy says a king must be chosen. But I think it got it wrong. It's not about one of us ruling the others. He took a breath, laying his heart bare. I'm asking you to build something with me. Not an army, not a kingdom, a family. Let's face the silent god, the council, whatever comes next, together. As one. My wives. The word hung in the air, audacious and sincere. It was not a claim of ownership, but an offer of absolute partnership. Yoruichi was the first to break the stunned silence. She threw her head back and laughed, a rich, full-throated sound. Took you long enough to ask, Foxy, she said, walking up to him and playfully punching his shoulder. Of course, I'm in. This is far too entertaining to pass up. Erza stepped forward next, her expression soft and certain. She placed a hand over her heart, where the emblem of her guild would be. I have fought beside you. I have trusted you with my life. To call you my husband, to call this a family, it feels right. Her acceptance was a simple, profound oath. Rias approached with a graceful, regal stride. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. She had seen the strategic and emotional logic of this from the beginning. A Grimoire marriage contract is a notoriously complex affair, involving the fate of entire pillars of the underworld, she said, her tone light but the words heavy. She reached up and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from his face. But for you, I believe we can make an exception. I accept, my king. 3 down. All eyes turned to Esdeath. She remained motionless, her icy gaze inscrutable. The seconds stretched into an eternity. She was processing his words, not as a romantic proposal, but as a paradigm shift. He hadn't offered her dominance or subjugation. He had offered her partnership. A new kind of strength. Finally, she spoke, her voice a low, dangerous purr. To be bound to the strongest man I have ever met, to see what kind of world we can create. Through our combined power. She took a step forward, her presence commanding the space between them. Very well, Naruto Uzumaki. I will accept this marriage. She tilted her head, a predatory gleam in her eyes. But do not for a second think this makes me weak. It only gives me more to conquer. Her acceptance was a challenge, a promise of a glorious, violent future, now intertwined with his. Naruto felt a grin spread across his face, white and bright as the sun. It was done. They were one. A family forged in the crucible of dying worlds. The moment of profound, triumphant unity was shattered. By a sound that tore through the observatory like a physical blow. A high-pitched, deafening alarm shrieked from the central concourse, red lights flashing across the ancient stone. What is that? Erza demanded, already summoning a sword. Rias was already moving, a blur of crimson hair as she raced to the astrolabe. She placed her hands on the controls, her eyes widening in horror. The wards. The cloaking field is collapsing. On the tactical map, a single, massive energy source appeared, then another, and another. In seconds, the display was flooded with hundreds of hostile signatures, appearing from nothing. Surrounding them completely. It's the Nexus Council, Rias breathed, her voice tight with disbelief. It's not a patrol, it's their entire home fleet. An armada. A holographic image flickered to life above the astrolabe, the cold, furious face of Praetor Valerius glaring down at them. His image was pristine, his voice dripping with triumphant contempt. Thieves. Anarchists, he spat. Did you truly believe you could steal from me, the praetor of this council, and face no consequences? Your pact is void, your very existence is a crime. By order of the praetor, you are to be erased. He had used the theft of the compass as the casus belli he needed, the political ammunition to rally the council and bring its full, overwhelming military might down upon them. The first volley struck, lances of pure, white-hot energy, each with the power of a tailed beast bomb, slammed into the observatory. The seed of Yggdrasil's power flared, the wards becoming visible for the first time, a shimmering green dome that cracked and spider-webbed under the sheer force of the assault. The entire island shuddered violently, stone groaning under the strain. The 5 of them raced to the balcony, the place of their union. Now a war room. They looked out at the impossible sight. Hundreds of sleek, silver warships, from kilometer-long dreadnoughts to swarms of agile fighters, filled the void. Their weapon ports glowing with malevolent light. Behind them, the Lyrian refugees were screaming, their newfound hope turning to ash. There was no fear in the eyes of the 5 who stood against the armada. There was no hesitation. They looked at each other, their marriage vows made only moments before now sealing their resolve. This was their first test. Naruto stepped to the very edge of the balcony. The howling wind of the ship's passage whipping his cloak. His wedding ceremony was over. His first act as a husband was to declare war. He met Rias's eyes, then Erza's, then Yoruichi's, then Esdeath's. A silent promise passed between them all. Then he turned to face the enemy fleet, and the power of a god awakened. A blinding golden aura erupted around him, his Sage of Six Paths mode activating in an instant. 9 black truth-seeking orbs materialized behind him, humming with the power to turn all things to dust. Beside him, Rias's hands ignited with the swirling, chaotic energy of pure destruction. To his other side, Erza shouted, "Requip, Armadura Fairy," and was enveloped in a flash of light, emerging in her strongest armor, a pink-hued plate that radiated immense magical power. A blizzard began to swirl around the balcony as Esdeath's killing intent froze the very air, her eyes glowing with the thrill of a glorious battle. And Yoruichi crouched low, her body crackling, enveloped in the raging golden lightning of her perfected shunko. They stood united, a line of 5 against an army, their combined power a defiant sun against an encroaching night. Their marriage had begun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Requiem for a World. The Nexus Council fleet opened fire. Not with a single volley, but with a sustained, rolling barrage of annihilating force. Hundreds of energy lances converged on the observatory. A storm of white-hot light designed to scour the island from existence. The green dome of their wards flickered violently, threatening to shatter under the onslaught. The wards won't hold for more than a minute. Rias projected telepathically to the group, her hands pressed to the astrolabe, trying to divert the seed of Yggdrasil's power to reinforce the failing shield. I can't direct a defense and command a battle at the same time. Naruto, command is yours. There was no hesitation. Naruto didn't need a map. His battlefield was the one laid out before him. And his sage mode gave him a perfect read on every ship, every energy signature, every impending threat. His voice rang out, not with a shout, but with the clear, unwavering authority of a battlefield commander. Esdeath, we need cover. Buy us time. Esdeath's smile was a slash of feral joy in the blinding light of the explosions. With pleasure, she leapt from the balcony into the void, not falling, but rising on a pillar of ice that grew beneath her feet, lifting her high above the observatory. She spread her arms wide, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of absolute zero. Permafrost Citadel. From the surface of their island, colossal walls of ice, thick and crenellated like a fortress from a dark fairy tale, erupted upwards. They soared into the sky, intercepting the barrage of energy lances. Explosions rocked the citadel, shattering entire towers of ice, but for every section that was destroyed, another grew to take its place. It was a dynamic, ever-regenerating defense, a testament to her absolute mastery over her element. The direct assault on the observatory ceased, now focused on the impossible fortress of ice. Yoruichi, Erza, you're our air superiority, Naruto commanded. Target their command ships. Cut the head from the snake. On it. Yoruichi was a golden blur, a comet of shunko energy that shot from the balcony and began to carve through the swarms of smaller fighter craft. She was untouchable, a phantom of lightning and thunder. She didn't just dodge their fire. She moved between the very particles of light, appearing inside their cockpits, disabling their pilots, and vanishing before the ship even began to spin out of control. Erza followed, a Valkyrie in her Armadura fairy armor. Requip. Heaven's Wheel. 100 swords materialized around her, a swirling vortex of steel. Blumenblatt. She roared, and the swords shot out like a swarm of angry hornets, not targeting the fighters, but the larger frigates. They pierced through shields and armor plating, targeting weapon emplacements and engine cores with pinpoint accuracy. A dozen frigates were crippled in her opening salvo. My turn. Naruto yelled, creating a dozen clones of himself, each one cloaked in the golden shroud of Kurama's power. Rias, I'm going to need some openings. Standing by, her voice echoed in his mind. He and his clones shot from the observatory, not flying, but leaping from platforms of solidified chakra, using his truth-seeking orbs as footholds in the void. They were a pack of golden wolves let loose on the fleet. Now, Rias, Naruto ordered. From the observatory, a single, focused beam of the power of destruction, impossibly dense and crimson black, lanced out. It didn't cause a massive explosion. It was a surgical strike. It hit the main shield generator of a massive dreadnought, and for a fraction of a second, a hole opened in its defenses. It was all Naruto and his clones needed. They swarmed the ship, landing on its hull. Sage Art. Massive Rasengan barrage. A dozen clones. A dozen giant Rasengans, all slamming into the unshielded hull of the dreadnought at once. The massive warship groaned, its spine broken, its internal systems rupturing in a chain reaction of explosions. It began to drift, dead in the water, a silent testament to their coordinated strike. The battle became a symphony of impossible power. From her ice citadel, Esdeath wasn't just defending. She was counter-attacking. She created colossal lances of ice, hundreds of meters long, and hurled them like javelins, impaling smaller cruisers and freezing them solid. The battlefield was a chaotic graveyard of flash-frozen ships and shattered ice. High above, Erza and Yoruichi had developed a devastating combination. Erza would use her Benizakura sword, focusing all her magical energy into a single massive slash that would punch through a capital ship's shields, and Yoruichi, following in the wake of the attack, would deliver a full-power Shunko blast directly to the bridge. They were a two-woman fleet killer team, moving with a synergy born of mutual respect and combat genius. But the Nexus Council's fleet was vast. For every ship they destroyed, two more moved up to take its place. Praetor Valerius, safe on the bridge of his flagship, the Invictus, watched the chaos with a cold fury. "They are animals," he snarled. "Wild, chaotic, and powerful. But they are not an army. Concentrate fire on the ice structure. It is their only defense. Wear them down. Overwhelm them with sheer numbers." The fleet adjusted its strategy, focusing the firepower of 100 ships on Esdeath's citadel. Even her immense power had its limits. The ice walls began to shatter faster than she could regenerate them. Cracks spread through her fortress. Naruto saw it instantly. Esdeath is getting overwhelmed. "Rias, I need a new combo. Your destruction energy and my Rasenshuriken. Can you do it? The energies are fundamentally incompatible." Rias sent back, her mind racing. "Your attack is about severing and expanding. Mine is about utter annihilation. The resulting detonation would be uncontrollable. Trust me," Naruto yelled, already forming the base of a wind-style Rasenshuriken. A clone landed beside him, helping him pour nature energy into it. Rias made a split-second decision. Her trust in him, forged in the Praxium, overrode her own logical analysis. She appeared on the balcony, her hands gathering a sphere of crimson-black energy, pure, unadulterated Grimoire power. "On your mark." Naruto hurled the shrieking Rasenshuriken. Now, Rias unleashed her attack, not at the fleet, but directly into the back of Naruto's jutsu. The two attacks merged in midair. The result was horrifying. The Rasenshuriken's structure destabilized, its shrieking blades of wind turning black. The sphere at its center collapsing into a miniature singularity of destructive force. It no longer spun. It vibrated, tearing at the very fabric of space around it. It hit the center of the Council fleet. There was no explosion. There was only a wave of silent, black energy that expanded outward. Every ship it touched, dreadnoughts, cruisers, fighters, was not blown apart. It was unmade. Shields, armor, crew, all were reduced to their component atoms and then to nothing at all. The attack carved a massive, gaping hole in the center of the Council's formation, wiping out a fifth of their fleet in an instant. The remaining ships fell silent, their guns ceasing to fire. Awe and terror washed over the crews. The 5 warriors had just unleashed a weapon that defied all known physics. But the victory was short-lived. A new energy signature, one that dwarfed even the combined fleet, suddenly appeared. A ripple in space, a tear in reality, and from it emerged a prime herald of the silent god. It was a gargantuan creature, far larger and more defined than the ones they had faced before. It was a being of pure, solidified silence, its form a mockery of a celestial angel. With wings of absolute black that seemed to suck the light from the stars. It had been drawn by the sheer, unimaginable concentration of power and emotion unleashed in the battle. The herald let out a psychic scream, a wave of pure despair and silence that washed over the entire battlefield. The crews of the Council ships cried out in agony, clutching their heads. The Lyrian refugees in the observatory collapsed, Their fragile hope shattered. Even Naruto's team felt it. It was a poison to the soul, an attack that targeted the will to fight. It was Esdeath who broke the spell. She threw her head back and laughed. A sound of pure, defiant joy. A glorious battle, a feast of power, and now a god appears for dessert. What a magnificent day. Her sheer, indomitable will, her love for the struggle itself, was an anchor against the psychic assault. Her defiance snapped the others out of their stupor. Praetor Valerius, on the bridge of his flagship, stared at the Prime Herald, his face low with a terror that transcended his hatred for Naruto. He finally understood. Rias had been right. This was their true enemy. All ships, he commanded, his voice trembling slightly but regaining its authority. Re-target. Fire everything you have at that thing. The Nexus Council fleet, moments ago their enemy, turned as one. The surviving warships unleashed a full broadside at the Prime Herald. Lances of light, plasma cannons, torpedoes, an arsenal built over millennia, slammed into the creature. The void was lit up by a man-made sun. The Herald barely seemed to notice. The light of the explosions was simply swallowed by its wings. It raised a hand, and a wave of nothingness washed over a dozen council ships, snuffing them out of existence like candles. It's no good, Naruto said, his gaze locked on the creature. Our attacks can't beat it. Valerius's army can't beat it. We need one attack, everything we have, all at once. He looked at his wives, his family. There was no need for a long speech. They all knew what needed to be done. He flew to the very pinnacle of Esdeath's shattered ice citadel, the highest point on the battlefield. To me, he roared, and he began gathering power. A sun of golden chakra in the darkness. Yoruichi appeared first, a bolt of lightning, placing her hand on his back. She poured all of her Shunko energy into him. Erza landed next, her armadura fairy armor glowing, channeling her vast magical reserves into the growing vortex of power. Esdeath rose on a pillar of ice, her own formidable energy, cold and sharp, flowing into the mix. Finally, Rias flew up, her power of destruction, not aimed as an attack, but offered as a pure, raw fuel. They were pouring everything they were, chakra, magic, Hito, demonic power, the very essence of their souls, into Naruto. He became a conduit, a living weapon. Kurama roared within him, adding his own cataclysmic power to the overload. A new cloak of energy enveloped him, not gold, but a blinding, incandescent white, threaded with crimson, black, and pale blue. In his hands, a Rasengan began to form, a sphere of pure, unified energy that pulsed with the combined heartbeat of 5 worlds. The Prime Herald sensed the threat. It gathered its own power, forming a sphere of absolute void, an attack that would not just destroy the island, but erase the entire sector from reality. It unleashed its attack, a wave of absolute non-existence. At the same moment, Naruto, with the combined power of his wives flowing through him, thrust his hand forward. Genesis Rasengan. The sphere of unified power shot forward. It was not an explosion. It was an act of creation. It met the wave of nothingness, and for a single, timeless moment, there was a perfect balance. Creation versus uncreation. Being versus nothingness. Then, life won. The Genesis Rasengan did not overpower the void, it filled it. It was a big bang in miniature, a seed of pure potential that violently and absolutely rejected the concept of nothing. It slammed into the Prime Herald, and the creature of silence and despair was filled with the overwhelming, chaotic, beautiful energies of 5 different realities. It was a poison it could not comprehend. The Herald didn't scream as it died. It simply came apart, its form dissolving not into dust, but into a shower of brilliant, multicolored light, like a dying star giving birth to a nebula. The light washed over the battlefield, and where it touched the drifting, frozen hulks of the council ships, the ice melted. Where it touched the damaged hulls, metal began to mend. It was an energy of pure restoration. The battle was over. The surviving council fleet drifted in stunned, absolute silence. They had just witnessed a miracle. A new god had been born in the heart of their nexus. But the Herald, in its final moments, had not been idle. Its dying scream was not one of pain, but of purpose. The energy of its dissolution did not just vanish. It coalesced, focused, and tore a hole in the fabric of reality itself. A stable, shimmering wound in space now hung where the Herald had been, a gateway that pulsed with an ancient, terrifying cold. It was a portal, a direct path to whatever lay beyond. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Throne of Silence. The echoes of the Genesis Rasengan faded into the profound silence of the void. The battlefield, once a maelstrom of light and fury, was now a quiet graveyard of crippled starships drifting aimlessly. The surviving crews of the Nexus Council fleet stared in mute awe, their war forgotten, their reality reshaped. On the pinnacle of the ice citadel, the incandescent white light around Naruto receded, leaving the five of them in the dim, chaotic twilight of the Nexus. They were drained, their reserves scraped to the very bottom, but they were standing. Yoruichi was leaning heavily against Naruto's back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Erza's armor was flickering, struggling to maintain its form. Rias's hands trembled slightly, the backlash from channeling so much destructive energy taking its toll. Esdeath's frosty aura had diminished to a faint shimmer, a rare sign of her own exhaustion. Naruto felt a profound connection to them, a circuit of shared spirit that went deeper than the power they had channeled. He could feel their exhaustion as if it were his own, but he could also feel their unbreakable resolve, and it bolstered his own. A holographic projection of Praetor Valerius flickered to life before them. His face was no longer filled with contempt, but with a deep, soul-shaking terror and a grudging, absolute respect. His image was staticky, his flagship clearly damaged. Uzumaki, he said, the name no longer an insult, but a title. That entity, what was it? The enemy you ignored, Rias answered, her voice steady despite her fatigue. Valerius stared at the shimmering wound in space, the portal left behind by the Herald's demise. It pulsed with a cold, ancient emptiness that seemed to drain the very will from those who looked at it. Can you close it? Rias shook her head. It is not a tear to be mended. It is a door that has been unlocked. It leads to the source. The Praetor was silent for a long moment, the millennia of his rigid order crumbling around him. He had brought his armada to punish a handful of rebels and had instead been saved by them from a threat he was utterly unprepared for. His authority was ash. The Nexus Council seeds this conflict, he stated, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. The fate of this reality is now in your hands. Do what you must. His image vanished, leaving them alone with the silent, waiting portal. There was no debate, no discussion of strategy. They all knew what came next. To leave the door open was to invite the entire storm into their new home. He said he was ceding the conflict, Yoruichi murmured, pushing herself to her feet. What he meant was he's running away. It doesn't matter, Erza said, her armor finally giving way. Leaving her in her simple battle tunic. This was always our fight. Esdeath looked at the portal, her eyes gleaming with a new kind of light. It was not the manic glee of a warrior finding a new foe. It was the sober, focused intensity of a master predator facing the single greatest challenge of its existence. The source of the ultimate prey, she whispered. Naruto looked at each of them, his family, his wives. He saw their exhaustion, but he saw no fear. He offered his hand to the center of their circle. One by one, they placed their hands on his. Rias's was elegant and warm, Erza's was calloused and strong. Yoruichi's was lean and pulsing with latent energy, and Esdeath's was surprisingly, unnervingly cold. A pact. Then we go, Naruto said. Together, as one, they leapt from the citadel and flew into the shimmering wound. The transition was not like passing through a door. It was like ceasing to be. All sensation vanished. There was no light, no sound, no temperature, no pressure, no feeling of movement. It was not a black void, it was the absolute absence of everything. They were motes of consciousness suspended in a realm of pure, unadulterated nothingness. And then, it began. Not with an attack, but with a thought. A single, pervasive concept that seeped into their minds, ancient, vast, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the consciousness of the silent God. It did not speak, but they understood. It did not see them as enemies, or as food, or even as living things. It saw them as noise. A discordant, chaotic anomaly in its perfect, silent universe. And its one driving impulse was to correct that anomaly. To make it quiet. The assault was not on their bodies, but on their souls. The world of nothingness dissolved, and each of them was plunged into a private hell. A reality crafted from their deepest, most fundamental fears. For Erza, The cold stone of the Tower of Heaven materialized around her. She was a child again, small and powerless, the rough slave rags chafing her skin. But it was worse than a memory. Standing before her, clad in their own slave rags, were Natsu, Gray, Lucy, and Wendy. They stared at her with empty, accusing eyes. And on a throne of black iron sat Jelal. Not the penitent man she had forgiven, but the cruel, possessed boy who had first broken her. "You see, Erza," he said, his voice a venomous whisper in her mind. "You could never protect them. Your strength is a lie. You left this place, but you brought its curse to everyone you love. They are here because of you. For Yoruichi, the world became a cage. Not of bars, but of pure, binding pressure. Her speed was gone. She couldn't even twitch a muscle. Her limbs felt like lead, her connection to her own spirit energy severed. She was pinned, helpless, a butterfly with its wings torn off. Before her, a phantom of Sosuke Aizen smiled condescendingly. Speed is merely the freedom to run, Shihoin Yoruichi, he mocked. But you can never run from your own weakness. You abandoned your titles, your responsibilities, all in the name of freedom. But what is a goddess of flash who cannot move? You are nothing. For Esdeath, the world became a battlefield of gray rock under a blood-red sky. But she was not the hunter. She was the prey, a being of pure, overwhelming power, its form indistinct but its strength absolute, stood before her. She unleashed her full might. Ice storms, time freezes. Legions of ice soldiers. And it was all for nothing. Her ice shattered like glass. Her Mahapadma failed to even slow her opponent. The being simply walked through her most powerful attacks and, with a casual flick of its wrist, broke her arm. It looked down on her, not with malice, but with the detached pity one might show a crushed insect. "The strong survive," a voice echoed in her mind. "It seems you were never among them." For the first time in her life, she knew true, abject helplessness. For Rias, she was in the grand hall of the Grimoire castle, but it was crumbling into dust. The crimson crest of her family cracked and fell from the wall. Her peerage, Akano, Kiba, Kaneko, all of them, stood before her, their bodies slowly dissolving into gray ash. "You failed us, Rias," Akano whispered, her face a mask of sorrow as she disappeared. Her brother, Sirzex, stood amidst the ruins, his usual kind expression replaced with cold disappointment. "You abandoned your duty for a fool's crusade. You pursued a power you could not control, and it has cost you everything. Our house has fallen, and it is your fault." Her legacy, her family, her entire world, turned to dust by her own ambition. And for Naruto, the vision was the cruelest of all. He was in Konoha. It was peaceful. The sun was shining. His father, Minato, was the Hokage, standing atop the monument. His mother, Kushina, was laughing in the market below. The Uchiha clan was thriving, with Sasuke playing happily with his older brother. The Akatsuki had been defeated long ago. The world was happy. It was perfect. But no one could see him. He was a ghost, a phantom of non-existence. He screamed their names, but no sound came out. He tried to touch them, but his hand passed through them. A single, horrifying realization dawned on him. This was not a world where he was dead. This was a world where he had never been born. The Nine Tails attack had been averted. His parents had lived, but the peace was fragile, incomplete. He could feel it. The undercurrents of hatred that he had spent his life fighting were still there, dormant but present. This perfect world was a lie, and he, the key to its true salvation, had been erased from the equation. His fear wasn't rejection. It was irrelevance. The despair was a physical weight, a poison that threatened to drown him, to make him accept the silence. But then, a flicker. A memory. The feeling of Rias's hand as she explained her strategy. The scent of ozone from Yoruichi's shunko. The sound of Erza's determined grunt as she held her shield against impossible odds. The shocking cold of Esdeath's energy flowing into him. They were not just memories. They were connections, tethers. They were a family, and that bond was a truth that existed outside of this psychic hell. They were real. His love for them was real. No, he thought, the single word a defiance against the crushing despair. I am not irrelevant. I am needed. Anchored by that one, absolute truth. He tore his way out of his own vision. The perfect, peaceful Konoha dissolved back into the realm of absolute nothingness. He was alone, but he could feel them. 4 points of light, 4 souls trapped in their own nightmares. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his spirit. He found Erza first. He appeared in her vision of the tower, not as a savior, but as a silent presence beside her. He didn't fight the phantom Jelal. He simply stood next to the small, terrified girl and offered her his hand. You aren't that girl anymore, Erza, he whispered into her soul. You are Titania, and you are not alone. She looked at her hand, then at his, and the phantom tower began to crumble. He found Yoruichi, bound and helpless. He couldn't break her chains, so he did something else. He pressed his own energy against them, not to shatter them, but to share the incredible burden. Freedom isn't about never being caught, he projected into her mind. It's about always having the will to break free. Your speed is in here, he touched her heart, not just in your legs. Now get up. A spark of her own rebellious spirit ignited, and the chains of pressure began to crack. He found Esdeath, broken and defeated. He stood between her and the unstoppable phantom. He didn't try to fight it. He just activated his 6 paths sage mode, its divine power a stark contrast to the creature's might. He's strong. Naruto's thought echoed in her mind, a calm statement of fact. So we'll just have to be stronger. Together. He didn't dismiss her philosophy. He validated it and then included himself in it. The idea of a shared strength, a hunt with an equal, was a concept so new, so powerful, that it rekindled the fire in her soul. The gray battlefield dissolved. Finally, he found Rias in the ruins of her home. He walked through the phantoms of her family and stood before her in the dust. He took her hand. It felt cold and distant. Your house hasn't fallen, Rias, he said softly. It just got bigger. He squeezed her hand, pouring his own warmth, his own unwavering belief in her, into the contact. We are your peerage now. We are your family, and we will never turn to dust. One by one, they emerged from the darkness, their psychic wounds raw but their spirits unbroken. They stood together again in the silent void, no longer separate individuals, but a single, unified consciousness. They were leaning on each other, battered and drained, but their eyes, when they turned to face the vast, unfeeling presence of the silent God, were burning with a defiant, united light. They had weathered the storm on their souls. They had faced their inner demons and won, not alone, but by the strength they gave to one another. They were hurt, but they were whole. They were 5 hearts, beating as one. The silent God was a formless, all-encompassing presence. It did not understand. Its attack had failed. The noise was still there. Louder, in fact, more harmonious. They stood together, a tiny island of vibrant, chaotic life in an ocean of perfect, sterile silence. They were ready. Chapter 9 End.